think I will call our town council meeting into order. Thank you for being here. Joy, who's just recovering from an operation, is participating virtually. And our fifth member of the council, Joel Rubin, is detained by work and will be here in about half an hour. Something he's been working on for years is coming to fruition on the floor of the House of Representatives right now. So he has another Democratic body to pay attention to. So he'll be here shortly. We're going to go through tonight. First of all, I want to thank Dave Walton for not giving us a variance this evening. This is a great pleasure. We really appreciate not having variances. With that, though, let me first turn to you, Joy, and the financial report. Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking back to last year. My apologies.
That's okay.
But our current treasurer, Irene Lane, and I do note that we have a stunning receipt of cash of $4,700 I registered so far.
I was going to say, holy moly. Yeah, this will be a brief report. We concluded our second month of the fiscal year in 2023, received a small tax distribution payment, as the mayor has discussed. Our big payments occur in November, February, May, and June. Just for resident knowledge. As far as expenses go, we're very much on track. What I wanted to focus on is kind of a feel-good item, which for this month, which is the community affairs and civic affairs budget of $146,000. And what we use that funding for is special events such as the 4th of July. We have an upcoming Fall Fest. We hosted a wonderful event on Sunday where the Rockville Band performed for not only residents, but just passersby and lots of children, which was very well attended and very well appreciated. In addition to that, our private canopy tree planting and maintenance programs are funded out of this particular line budget, as well as the consulting arborist and water management programs for residents themselves. And then we also, that is where we support our senior support services. So it kind of dovetails into a discussion that will occur later on this evening. These are all direct resident services that are well sought after, they're well utilized, and they're very much appreciated by residents. And it's an example of how the town council also reacts to resident requests. So for those listening in on there that have some ideas that they'd like to think about for the town council, whether it be a special event or another climate resiliency type of program or something along those lines, we're definitely open to hearing more ideas and making sure that you all as residents can continue to be interacting with us. So that's my report for the month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Any thoughts? Joy? Rich?
No.
Okay. All right. With that, we don't note the report. Thank you. And just to highlight, November is the big month. That's when we find out everything about the year financially, because from that we can estimate, we know what the estimated payments will be going forward, and we know whether we're going to be in the black or not. So. Oh, sorry. Well, I'll shut up, and you can rerun the thunder next month. Okay, Todd, over to you. Going through what you've been up to.
Sure, I'll just review some of the staff initiatives over the last month, in addition to assisting the council with larger ongoing projects, including Corso redevelopment and the related proposed binding elements that will be discussed tonight. We've also addressed Farm Women's Market Parks Development Project, the Purple Line Project. In addition to that, staff has communicated with the County Department of Transportation and EYA, the developers of the Farm Women's Market project, regarding proposed design changes to the Capitol Crescent Surface Trail Phase 2 that will impact Elm Street Park, 47th Street, and Willow Lane. We were notified recently of a county request to shift the entrance to the Farm Women's Market underground garage in a way that will affect the turning radii for vehicles turning onto 47th from eastbound Willow, and will also affect potentially traffic circulation patterns in that area. Irene and I met with EYA reps recently to discuss these changes. And frankly, I don't know, I won't speak for Irene, but I came away more confused than I was elucidated or enlightened. And so Irene is going to meet, unfortunately, I won't be able to attend a Wednesday morning meeting due to a personal obligation, but Irene is going to be meeting with both EYA and MCDOT officials on Wednesday morning to get more details and discuss the need for this change and its implications further. So we'll have more to report to you after that. Staff also communicated again with SHA officials about the East-West Highway crosswalk design and redesign options. We have not heard back from SHA with any substantive information regarding review of design options for the current crosswalk design, which is effectively a yellow signal rather than a red signal. In the meantime, SHA has recently installed bollards, in-road signs, as they have had previously agreed to, in concert with looking into options for the redesign of the crosswalk, specifically changing it from a yellow signal to a red signal that would stop traffic to allow pedestrians to cross. We've performed some initial evaluations of these improvements that have just been made and have observed that they have slowed down traffic for now. But they'll need to be certainly, I believe, coupled with improvements to the crosswalk signalization to provide for a truly effective and safe crosswalk, meaning there's really no island in which pedestrians can stand if traffic doesn't stop on a yellow. But coupled with a red signal, we believe, the totality of those improvements will create a truly effective and safe crosswalk.
Thank you, Irene, for going out and checking on that, coming back with those observations.
Absolutely. And we've also, as you know, communicated with our neighbors in Edgeville to understand how because they are utilizing the crosswalk on a daily basis. And they've provided their feedback as well. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Staff also assisted with developing the town's response to county zoning text amendment 2201 regarding small cell deployments. And we submitted a letter to the county council with requested amendments to both tighten the methods and processes for certain small cell deployments and to clarify certain standards in the ZTA. Is there anything else to report on that, Irene?
Well, we're having a discussion later on about that as well in the agenda.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
More about our telecom ordinance. But yeah, so that's a good segue. The staff also assisted the 5G working group with review of proposed amendments to the town telecommunications ordinance and development of the right-of-way use agreement, and that will be discussed later this evening. Staff also met with the town's consulting engineer to get an update on the drainage and design related to Zimmerman. Our engineer has resubmitted the stormwater management concept plan to the Department of Permitting Services. And once that is approved, he's already incorporated initial comments and will incorporate additional comments if those are received. And once the stormwater management concept plan is approved, he'll move to 60% design plans. And we'll have an opportunity to review those at 60% to make sure everything looks good. And then the engineer will proceed with erosion and sediment control plans, as well as permitting from WSSC and the State Highway Administration.
Overall, in terms of the pace of work on that, my recollection is that we hope to get permits by the end of this calendar year. Does that still look likely to you?
I think it's feasible, either at the end of the calendar year or very early next year.
Okay.
Depends upon how lengthy the review process is and how much they have in their pipeline. We're really at the mercy of the review and regulatory agencies on this one. So we're working, apace, and certainly Clark Azar is doing so as well. But we're really at the mercy of the what's in the pipeline right now for the review agencies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Fred, my recollection is even after we get the permits, then there's more work to be done to put out the bids for the construction. So that takes some months. So if we're going to start construction in the spring of 2023, it does mean we have to get the permits over the winter time.
That's right. We'll have to go to 90% design, and then he'll finalize. Or maybe we won't go to 90% design. Maybe after 60%, he'll just do full construction plans. We'll have to bid it out over the winter and early spring, and hopefully be able to start construction by summer. next year.
All right. And how long do we think the construction will take?
You know, I think Jason indicated it wouldn't take that long, a couple months, but not longer.
My recollection. It would be nice if we could open the park before the end of next summer.
It would. Definitely
Right.
would.
Okay. All right, please.
Sure. Staff retained a contractor to an inventory and inspection or analysis of town storm drains. And we, since we hadn't heard back from MCDOT about an email that I had sent quite a while ago requesting more information on storm drain functionality and future, the county's indication that they would do a future storm drain analysis, nor on, frankly, on when promised new inlets will be installed at Thornapple Sump. Staff took the initiative to hire a contractor to inventory and inspect all of the town storm drains. The findings of that research or report, if you will, which I sent to the council, showed 73. We have 246 storm inlets in town. 73 have debris in them or were clogged, and 4 need structural repairs. So we did send this information to the county for remediation, and they did respond the next day that they'll look into these locations next week, meaning this week. And then they'll also schedule the most critical ones to be fixed. Staff is going to need to monitor and follow up as needed, and we may need to step in if the county's unresponsive or takes too long, but I'll keep the council apprised of how this is proceeding.
But I appreciate the proactive quality of getting them to come back, doing that survey and getting to them, and amazed that they responded in a single day.
It was pretty amazing.
But I also think, I think it's important to put it out there. Well, fixing all this will be helpful. It's not going to be night and day. There's a limit to what we can gain from getting rid of the debris, and we just have to realize it's not the only answer to our problems here.
Right. Yeah. Why don't we probably shouldn't expect to see a huge improvement from the cleanup and repair.
But whatever improvement there is welcome, and it's important to keep the drains clear. That's good.
Yes.
Okay.
Staff assisted with communicating with the Bethesda Fire Department regarding the town's nomination to the board. I don't believe there's anything else to say here other than that we'll keep pressing the department to consider our nomination and consider working with other municipalities served by the BFD to ensure community accountability. But other than that, Barney, is there anything else you want to report on that?
I'll just mention Irene and you and I are sort of the triumvirate working this problem. And Scott Schachter, our nominee to be on the board of the Bethesda Fire Department, has been very gracious and willing to allow his name to stay out there through this incredible delay. And by the way, I forwarded to Scott the letter that went out over my signature asking the board of the Bethesda Fire Department to reconsider his nomination. For the general public, this is a very frustrating issue. There's a vacancy on the board with the retirement of Grant Davies from last December. I had been on that board for a couple, maybe 20 years, very long time. And this, the Bethesda Fire Department serves the surrounding communities, and we are the largest community. And there are spaces for, I've forgotten, 12 or so members of the board, and every reason in the world that someone nominated by the town of Chevy Chase would be considered. But the chief and the head of the board basically just refused to even consider this. So it's very irritating. It does not have any impact on the actual quality of service from the professionals at the fire station, because they report up through the whole line of chain through the county. But what we do care about is the development of a volunteer force to help out, especially with the ambulance. And that has not been as strong as it could be, and we think could benefit from a good board and benefit from Scott Schachter's presence, who is a volunteer at the Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue Group. So anyway, we will continue to push, but as we'll continue to push with the whole board, not just those two leaders. And as you say, Todd, our next follow-up is to work more closely with the other communities, especially Somerset, that are also very frustrated with the Bethesda Fire Department, and try to find a way to put more pressure on them. And we may well have to go to the county council. So to be continued. But thank you. Please go ahead.
That concludes.
Unless my colleagues have any questions, I don't want to rush that. Okay.
I had two tiny little questions more. What's the status with the website redesign?
It hit a bit of a roadblock. We weren't very happy with the design, the initial redesign, and then weren't happy with the follow-up. So I'm meeting next week with the project manager and art director to go over some issues that I have with it. So it's been delayed. But here again, this is a redesign solely in aesthetics, not in functionality. And I've also actually had a discussion with the CEO of Civic Plus regarding the issues of functionality and the issues we've been having with the redesign. And he has stepped in to assist, for lack of a better characterization. So it's hit a bit of a delay, but hopefully it'll get back on track soon and we can get something done fairly quickly.
Do you need any help from the council members at all for that?
At this point, I don't believe so, but potentially I could draw some of you in to assist in reviewing a design that at least meets my standards.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then with respect to the office refurbishment, where's the status on that?
Yeah, John Lloyd is going to be undertaking that. We have had several discussions about that. He's also working on archiving town documents.
Okay.
There are some, it's the best to say it's in the works. We're looking at options and alternatives and ways we can amend the office space to better reflect our future needs and ongoing needs and post-pandemic needs.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll need to have a discussion with some of you about what your interests are with respect to that and what usable meeting space we should provide in addition to the town hall. Some issues that arise there are accessibility to the town office. We certainly don't want to give keys out to the town office because of the sensitive nature of the documentation we have in there. Yeah. And allow groups to use it and distribute keys to the office. The town hall is a different matter. And how we reconfigure that to provide for additional office space and meeting space is something we've discussed, but we're continuing to discuss. So it's not imminent, but it's being discussed.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else, Todd?
No, that's all.
Items on your list. Okay, good. All right. Any other comments from my colleagues? All right, good. Thank you. Now's the time for public comments. Is there anybody, the town resident, who wishes to speak? Deborah, please. You need to come up and speak from the podium.
I happened to tune in to on the internet to a meeting of the county council last week, and actually I was interested in another issue, the cell tower ordinance, and I'm very concerned about that as well, and cell towers being possibly 30 feet from a home. I think there are flaws in that ordinance. But what I really want to address is something that came up later, which was a discussion of the purple line and the trail alongside the purple line. And a few of the council members, including our Mr. Friedson, representing District 1, expressed concern about the fact that that trail has been closed for so long, and that, well, the presentation was made by the consortium that's doing the purple line, the trains, the tracks, et cetera. And the question was raised whether before the trains are actually running, like when the construction's completed, but they're testing the trains and so on, couldn't they open the trail at least some of the time? That was a question that was raised. And the answer from those who are doing the construction of this project was no, the trail could not be opened, until a point, several years hence, when the purple line and the train, in terms of the trains, is going to be open. I don't always agree with Mr. Friedson on all the issues, but I have to say, he was very eloquent in his advocacy on behalf of people in our community who love the trail, including students going to school, people walking along the trail, people biking, etc. Some of us are kind of in mourning because there's no way we're going to have the trail back the way it was with all the wonderful trees lining it. But there still is supposed to be a trail at some point. And I would like to urge this council, I assume you've been talking to county council members about this, but I'd like to urge you to really push in behalf of our residents to the county council and to the consortium or whatever that are doing this project to say that we want that trail opened at least at times when there's no actual construction going on prior to the time that the trains start running, because that's going to be an awful long time to wait. So that's it. I just want you council members to pat Mr. Friedson on the back, say, yes, that was good. We support you, but our residents really want that trail opened. And I would like to see, I don't know if the town could be involved in this at all. You know, I've contemplated even civil disobedience. Let's go out on the trail, but I happen to look through the gate and I see there's not even a place to walk there now. So civil disobedience makes no sense. But I'd like to see a nice, large, peaceful demonstration in the park, which maybe the town could co-sponsor, just to bring attention to this issue and a little pressure on the companies involved in the construction of this project to say, you know, let's open that trail sooner rather than later when the construction is done. But let's not wait till all the testing with the trains is done. People want their trail back and we want it. We want it now, but now's not going to be practical, but we want it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Very good comment, Deborah. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to comment at this time? We will not have comments later on during our deliberations. So if anybody wishes to speak about any of the issues that we'll be discussing later on tonight, now is the time. Ann, please go ahead.
Good evening,
Ann Stooks,
everybody.
I see your hands up.
Yeah. Sometimes my computer's a bit slow to react. So as the council members know, I probably know, I live on Woodside Place, and I sent you all a letter this weekend on behalf of all the homeowners on Woodside Place. And I think you will be considering that letter and all the terms that you'll be finalizing or at least deliberating further to seek from Corso. So I think the way your meeting works is you receive public comment and then close public comments and dialogue only with each other. So I wondered if the council members wanted to ask us anything on Woodside Place. I think at least one other of my neighbors is here tonight. And then I will maybe, oh yes, there's Jessica. She may want to chime in right now.
Okay, thank you.
No, actually, I wasn't finished, but I wanted Jessica to be able to speak.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you, Anne. I was just kind of making my presence known. Why don't you carry on? And then I have a particular issue I was going to bring up, but you might cover it. So go right ahead.
So as the council knows, we raised a number of issues, some of which we've raised before. In particular, the concern about the pathway that is proposed from Woodside Place into and out of the Corso property. I guess I'd like to underscore that to a person, we bought our houses because of the wonderful cul-de-sac atmosphere that we have on Woodside Place. And the proposal to open a sidewalk is concerning to us. And it will change the nature of our street in ways that we don't yet know, but we can anticipate, because right now we live in a way that if someone is on our street, we notice if it's not someone that we know. We feel very safe to have our children in the yards, in the streets, and it will change the nature of the way that we live in a way that we don't seek. We are fortunate to live close to the main corridor of transportation on Connecticut Avenue, but not be connected to it. And the majority of homeowners on Woodside Place like it that way. So I wanted to draw your attention to that and ask the members of the council to consider, if it were your street, your home, and you chose it for this reason, would you want to change it? So I would ask you to think about that when you vote on the wording of that sidewalk connection. There are other items that we have in our letter. I think a number of us were on that mosquito bitten walk in our, we appreciate the opportunity to go through the Corso property. It was, I don't know about you all, it was fascinating to see that box den and to go through and hear firsthand from the owners of Corso, who are so generous with their time to talk with us on an unplanned set of questions. So thanks for arranging for that. It did seem on that walkabout that Corso was willing to do some of the landscaping things that we asked for. So hopefully those would sail through, including the removal of the bamboo that has been actually a persistent problem for us on Woodside. It has spread to a number of yards in a way that is difficult to control. So that hopefully it wouldn't be a controversial issue. There are a number of things that we're asking for the council to consider that we haven't talked about that much in the past, including asking for a little bit more of a side setback for the buildings on the Woodside side. The Thornapple residents, of course, have the benefit of that longstanding covenant, which gives them an 81-foot setback. I think Corso proposes 60 feet on the Woodside side. We asked for 20 more feet on that. Maybe that's not too big of an ask for Corso. And I think Jessica may talk about the really urging the town to consider some wording of environmental issues. As we all know, these are issues that confront not just our community, but the whole world. This is a facility that's being built for the long term, for the next 50 or 100 years. Most of the houses on Woodside Place, most of them are about 100 years old now. This facility is going to go into the future and maybe could be built with things that would be good environmentally. I think Jessica could talk a little bit more about that. But before I wrap, I don't want to just belabor the points that we put in our letter. I did want to see if the council members would like to talk with us about anything, assuming that this meeting is going to go in the way that I think it goes, which is not so much a dialogue with members of the public, but a dialogue with one another.
We're going to be deliberating on this tonight, so you'll hear our views when we go through that. And we're always open for other comments. But I think your letter was perfectly clear in what it said, and my colleagues haven't come back asking for further discussion on the items.
All right. Well, as always, thank you very much. And I will yield to my good neighbor, Jessica Langerman, who does live directly adjacent to the 4-H property.
Okay. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ann. Yes, I have spoken to Grant Epstein a number of times about the environmental impact of Corso, and I've made any kind of number of suggestions that may or may not be realistic given the laws that are currently in place in our town and in the county. But I've mentioned things like perhaps this could be an all-electric facility. There could be no gas infrastructure. Perhaps he could create a microgrid, use geothermal, install solar. One thing that Grant said to me that surprised me was he said that in this northern latitude, solar doesn't work. And so I sent him some books on the subject, or a book on the subject, but I think he's very unaware of green energy alternatives. However, I don't know what the town could possibly do about that, other than to perhaps just encourage them as much as possible to as Anne said, make this, a facility that could really be a showpiece as far as green energy goes. But anyway, that's, again, just be a wish. But I was just going to belatedly add my voice to the bamboo issue. As you all know, there is a big bamboo grove right abutting our property and the Burlers property on Connecticut. And that bamboo grove is becoming such a problem. It is now invading our whole backyard. It's going all the way over into Anne's backyard. I have bamboo coming up all over our lawn. I realized at the 11th hour that perhaps this could be an opportunity to ask them please to eradicate that. And I'll just mention one of the ways that's very popular for developers to eradicate bamboo is by using Roundup, which is glyphosate, which is carcinogenic and gets into the waterways and would be terrible. Would rather have the bamboo, but there are non-toxic ways of getting rid of bamboo, smothering it, using vinegar. There are all different solutions. So I just really hoping perhaps they could eradicate that bamboo grove if possible. So that's my piece for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Are there any other comments any other residents wish to make? Looking for other hands up on the screen. And I do not see any. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll, of course, be taking up the discussion of the binding elements after our next presentation. So with that, I would like to ask the representatives from Chevy Chase at Home to come to the podium. For the benefit of the residents, the town of Chevy Chase supports Chevy Chase at Home. We have now for the last 3 or 4 years with a grant because they do such very important service on behalf of the residents of our town. And so we're happy to do that. But it was Irene Lane's, I think, very good suggestion that we should periodically hear from you and how things are going and make sure we understand how our money is being used. So we're welcome having you here tonight to discuss what you're doing.
Thank you. My name is Linda Kaplan, and I'm the president of Chevy Chase at Home. And Wendy Finn is our executive director. And we will be doing the presentation this evening, and we're happy to answer questions. And we have one of our founding members here, Fran Pitlick, and we're just delighted. Fran has been incredibly important to Chevy Chase at Home and its continued growth. So we really appreciate it. We want to thank you for this opportunity to speak this evening. We really appreciate the support of the town. As you may know, or may not know, the town of Chevy Chase was really where Chevy Chase at Home was born. In fact, we were sitting on a bench tonight dedicated to Naomi Kaminsky, who with, excuse me, with Joan Urban started Chevy Chase at Home. They were walking their dogs, and it went from a little kitchen table to a garage where it's in it. And we now have 2 part-time staff, a small little office over at the Regional Service Center. So it's really grown from this little small thing, but it really was birthed right here in the town. And we really do appreciate the support that we have received from the town. It's been immensely important to us. One of the things I wanted to let you know, the town always has been has had the largest percentage of members, the largest number of members in our catchment area. We now have 10 different sections, including the town and the Chevy Chase Village in section 3 and 5, and Martin's Addition, Rollingwood, the Village of Drummond, Chevy Chase West, the Old Hamlet, and the Riviera. It's a building in Chevy Chase. And right now, of those 10 areas, 23% of our members reside here in the town, which is
How many members do you have?
23. We have about 200.
200. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So this has been, this is really very, very important to us. And We appreciate that. We also have a number of volunteers who live in the town, and volunteers are absolutely critical to our success and our ability to provide services. They're the ones who, will drive, and I'm going to let Wendy talk more about that in a minute, but they also provide a lot of other types of services and a lot of personal socialization opportunities, which are very, very important to the members who need services. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what we do. We've just completed an annual report. Wendy's going to be able to give you some information about the types of services and the hours and all of the things we've done this last year. So I'm going to hand it over to Wendy. Thank you.
The work that we do is critically important to those we serve. So we have volunteers who reach out and assist those who are living independently, but may need assistance to do that safely and with a high quality of life. Those volunteers provide basic services that are essential to that. They represent over 3,000 hours of assistance and support, providing services even in the midst of COVID that we could not continue without. The numbers represented here come from 2021. So of course, some of our services were limited during periods of that year, obviously in the spring prior to vaccination, and then when nasty Omicron came back to bite. But despite those obstacles, the services include rides. Most of the individuals receiving these rides no longer use their car, rides to doctor's appointments, and to the drugstore, to the grocery store, things they absolutely need to be able to accomplish. We also provide errands. So for those individuals who prefer that we provide that service to them, others really enjoy the opportunity to get out and pick their own vegetables. At the same time, we provide significant number of friendly visits, and those are, whether they're monthly or weekly, they're phone calls, they're in person. Sometimes we sit with an individual who is homebound while their partner is out doing an essential doctor's visit, things of that sort. And then we offer household tasks, and those can be as diverse as, just this week, we were changing light bulbs when the person should no longer be getting up on a ladder. We are moving some furniture so they can have their rugs cleaned, bringing in a heavy box. There's so many different ways that even minor efforts can make such a life transformative impact. And then finally, our technology support visits. I don't think any of us has not had that moment when technology just confounds us. And these are individuals who are not digital natives. So whether it is the television, the phone, the tablet, or the computer, having someone come into their home who has the patience and knowledge to help move them forward is invaluable. Every time I hear from members about their technology visits, I'm kind of jealous because I think I need one of those too. So in addition to all of these services, we also provide programs because we always knew that social—
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Go back to the previous slide.
Previous slide.
Previous slide, please. Thank you. When you have those visits, if you see something that you're concerned about, that the resident is simply not able to take care of him or herself, and you feel another level of care is required, what do you do and what can you do?
That is a really, really important question, because our intent is to support people to age successfully at home. But if there's an instance, our volunteers report that to the office, and our volunteers worry a lot. They really care very deeply, and in many instances develop very, personal relationships with our members. They contact the office. We gather as much information as we can about what they've seen. And then all of our members have at least one, if not more, individuals identified as their contact, as their emergency contact. At that point, we would be calling usually son, daughter, but sometimes friend, and reporting, we were out to visit, here's what we witnessed. And the volunteer is concerned about this. At the same time, we have to balance those questions. So an individuals whose home is messy, there are probably people in this room whose home is messy. I see someone willing to confess their sins. So we want to balance judging with safety.
I just want to, one of the critical things is, again, not to make a judgment value about how the person is living or whatever, but I think the volunteers often will report a change in behavior, and that for us is the key thing. So if suddenly they're finding the person's mobility is really not good, or has changed, or they're concerned about other behaviors that they've never seen before, that's when we may call. And again, we respect this, and you'll see in a little while, we'll be going over our values, but that's when we may contact a family member or a very close friend who they've designated as their contact person.
Right. So you aren't taking on the judgment issue of whether you should go to
No, that is
the county service of some sort. That's somebody else's job. But you want to make sure that person knows.
We've had people report, oh my God, the house is a mess. Well, this person, and we once did call a child, one of the person's contacts, it was a son, and he said, her house has always been like that. I mean, no, so we have to,
Okay.
we have to be really careful about that, and respect their rights.
Good, thank you.
We do have referral services. We provide support to families so that they can seek the assistance they need. There are several providers in the area who have a very high level of expertise in evaluating situations. And fortunately for both our members and for us, in most instances, the families are looking for that assistance. So it's a team effort to kind of keep everybody well. Are there other questions? Okay. In addition to the services, which are so important, all of us learned during the pandemic how important social engagement is. It was a lesson in that I hope we never need to see again. And despite the pandemic, we were able to continue with a number of additional programs. The vast majority of these happened online, although a handful of them did happen in person. So we are blessed. Our board and volunteers are able to connect us with some very high caliber speakers. We have all of the resources, literally, because we're virtual around the world in terms of cultural programs. And then on a more intimate basis, we have a number of interest groups, book group, movie group, sort of all the obvious suspects, which allow people to come together in small groups. And at that time it was virtually, but, looking to the future, back in person, to keep connected. And then finally, exercise classes. We have online exercise classes as well as several walking groups. So keeping active to maintain one's health. And then in terms of what's new in 2022, things are looking up. We have started sponsoring largely outdoor in-person events, taking advantage of the good weather. So that includes some visits to local art museums, very popular lunch program, a handful of social gatherings, and the launch of a couple of new interest groups. Beyond that, in terms of services, what we're finding is we're all getting out more. That includes our members. So it is a pleasure to be able to pick them up and see them out to lunch, to see them off to the Bethesda pool, so that they can, engage as they feel comfortable.
Do you have transportation for the residents, or do you provide?
We provide rides. So if somebody wants to go to one of our social events, we have a volunteer who will pick them up and take them. In most instances, the volunteer is also a member and also attending, so it's just a win-win all around. And then finally, just a few weeks ago, we conducted a training on medical note taking, so we can add that to our offerings. Many of our members at a certain point in their life have complex health issues, and it is challenging to manage those in this current environment. So, and then finally, I do want to share just a handful of quotes we have from our members. There are many of them. Our members value what we do, and we are able to enrich their lives in ways that other services don't have, whether it's that visit, the support of an assistant to do that errand, that really helps them maintain a quality of life.
We had a question over here.
Oh, absolutely.
Two questions. First one for giving people rides as a liability factor. I mean, if there were an accident, how would you all handle that?
We do have appropriate insurance.
I'm sorry, would you please repeat the question? Because I don't think the people.
The question was, the concern was regarding the liability associated with providing rides. We do background checks on all of our volunteers, including on their driving record for those who are going to be giving rides. And then we also have insurance to cover liability concerns. So
What if there's an accident? Does it affect the driver's insurance if the passenger is in an accident in their car?
I don't believe so, but I am not certain. It has not ever come up. Fortunately, we've never had the concern.
Question is with the medical, which is a great service, is medical note taking. How do you address confidentiality? Those conversations can be very personal.
So
I'm sorry, please repeat the question again,
Oh,
because otherwise.
I apologize.
Home audience won't be able to hear you.
In terms of the medical note taking and a concern regarding privacy, the training came to us from a village in DC that had developed a set of policies. And then the training really emphasizes among other things, the concern regarding privacy. So the intent is the person is a recorder. They're not an active participant in the conversation, and they're not in any way making recommendations or suggestions. They are simply providing a record to allow the individual to make better decisions for themselves and or possibly share it with family members as they see fit.
Sign something, say they will abide by critical type confidentiality, or is that not that structure?
We have not had that structure, but it's a very interesting question. We are just rolling this out, so it's a good timing for that question, and I appreciate the suggestion.
I just want to add one thing, though, that all volunteers do sign a confidentiality statement anyway, because they are, obviously working with some of our volunteers. And so that to us is really very important.
I'm sorry, let me, if I can, counsel first, please. First, can you say something more about the number of members and how they are changing over time? And also, do you feel that there's an untapped, a larger number of people who could benefit but have not signed up? And if that's the case, what do we need to do about that?
You jumped to the
you jumpp to our conclusion.
I didn't mean to do that.
Which
Sorry.
is great. We let it. Can we? Do you
Of
want to
course.
engage
No,
in that,
stay- no,
and then
stay with
we'll
your
get to that?
presentation.
Because in fact, there has been, and I know that Fran, who's been here since the beginning, there have been some changes which we did want to talk about. I mean,
Okay.
we obviously from the onset where we had all the founders and people who started with us, and they've aged and they're aging out in a number of different ways. And we'll talk about that with our strategic plan. If you can give us 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't realize there was more to come. All right.
And there's one more.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, as a new member, I and I did this when you mentioned the right of the best school, I'm proud of me. And as someone who gave up driving during the pandemic. I may go back to work, but how would I know the battery died? I may not go back. The rides and medical appointments as well, and medical appointments have $30.
Thank you,
I
Deborah.
appreciate your sharing that. Anything else before I turn it back to Linda?
No, please go back to Linda and you can deal with the other questions.
We're going to get to your question, Barney, in just 5 minutes. And I want to see if Fran wants to add anything because she knows things probably more than we do about all of this. She's been here so long. And just quickly, we're going to go over, we've just completed a strategic planning process. And it's really, I think, the first one we've ever done. And part of it is related to the question you asked, which is, you know, where do we go from here? We've been in existence for 13 years. Things are changing, the demographics of the area changing. I mean, you know, many of the people who started, many of even my contemporaries are beginning to move out. The houses are either being torn down and bigger houses are being built. And there are a lot more younger families, which is wonderful, but there's definitely a change in that regard. So we felt this was very important for us to do. And that includes mission, vision, values, and strategic directions. And we'll go over those quickly. And then we really were hoping to engage in a dialogue with all of you. So we hope that. And our vision, as you can see here, is a neighborhood that supports the well-being and connectedness of everyone in the community. And to us, the sense of community is critically important. And this whole idea of sort of more of an intergenerational community. We want to, I know our members, and you know, I'm one of them, we want to stay in the neighborhood for as long as we possibly can live in our homes. I will be honest, my husband is probably going to be carried out feet first because he said he's never moving. So I think that what we can, the more we can do to keep people healthy and safe in their homes, the better. Our mission, which is, you know, Chevy Chase at Home is a volunteer-based nonprofit organization and builds a vibrant community supporting the members 55 plus. So we really are looking at the people who are younger, older adults. Hard to put that in context, but, and people who are newly retired, because we have a lot of social programs and things like that, that really build community. And again, the dignity of our, so we want to make sure that we offer these programs with, and services with dignity to all of the members. The values, which we spent a lot of time crafting, and this was all done with the board and the committee chairs, so it wasn't just pulled out of the air. And our values are caring, we are compassionate, kind, and generous, respect, and we honor the wish for independence, control, and privacy, which gets back a little to the question of what do you do with some members who think that they're, you know, they want to control how they live and what they want to do. Relationships, again, the supporting relationships and the making sure that people have access to those social interactions is critically important because it not only enriches their lives, but it also improves their physical and mental health. And then engagement, we want to encourage an active lifestyle and as much as we possibly can. So our overall, this is our overall strategic direction, which is to ensure a vibrant, growing Chevy Chase at Home that responds nimbly to the evolving needs of the older adults in our community. And again, we're defining older adults from 55 plus. The strategic directions, we have 6 of them. And one is to grow our membership for organizational sustainability. And again, our membership was a little higher, to be honest. We are, you know, again, we were really impacted by the coronavirus. I mean, it really had an impact on us and our members. We want to expand the organizational brand from providing services to also engaging mature, active adults in enhanced social activities with their neighbors and distinguishing Chevy Chase programs from those provided by other providers. and develop social and educational program that appeals to all of our target audiences, including active, mature neighbors, new retirees, and offers values to members while encouraging others to explore membership. Next, then 3 more is to provide high quality services to our full members, and the full members are, have been the focus in many ways for what we do, and those are the ones who receive our full panoply of services. And we want to ensure, obviously, the long-term financial stability of the organization so we can grow and adapt to the changing needs and times. And again, we're evaluating our organizational structure so we can provide the foundation for an effective and sustainable organization. And we'll be glad to answer questions. When you asked what we came up with, a mailing, you asked about what we could do, and we'd like to do a mailing to the town of Chevy Chase residents who are 55 and over, and tell them more about Chevy Chase at Home. Certainly a series of Chevy Chase at Home social events in the town would be something that would be great, but we're really open to talking about other collaborations and wanting to hear what you think. So I'm glad to answer any questions.
This was our chance to hear from you this evening.
Right.
We do have a long agenda.
Right. So
this is not a time for a general discussion and resolution of all that.
Right.
And I encourage Beth, unless it's really urgent. It's really urgent.
It's really urgent.
Okay.
Okay.
Which is Chevy Chase at Home is part of it's part of a network
Village.
of villages in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And villages were an initiative of the Commission on Aging, and the county council many years ago required Health and Human Services to create a position of coordinator at the county level for villages, who's done an outstanding job of developing villages. Her name is
Yeah.
and so this is the county supporting us aging in place. It's the county's approach to supporting people, my interpretation so that people don't turn to the county for services. It's a volunteer organization. It's a network of volunteer organizations. It's part of the Villages to Village Network, which is a national organization. So this is part of the fabric, the fibers that the county is doing to help us age in place.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyway,
That's great.
Just wanted to provide
No, it's great.
that
If you don't mind, I didn't want to, I like numbers. So we now have 200 members, and you say it's down. What was the membership
it
before?
was probably about 225 to 230.
Oh, okay. So not a big decline.
It's not,
Okay.
it's not enormous.
And I guess what we should have some follow-up discussion about is the best way to reach out. And Irene Lane is the liaison to our Community Relations
Okay,
Committee.
great, Irene.
So I think there's
Let
good
me-
follow-up here to try
Yeah,
to
I have
see
my-
what we can do to help in that. Yeah.
Any of those things.
That'd be,
We really appreciate your time.
Thank
I know
you.
you're busy, so thank
no,
you.
thank you. Can you do that? I think, please.
What's that? Sorry?
No, if you can follow up and.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will follow up with you both. Thank you very much. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I think we all feel very supportive and would love to see even more people, because what I'm really hearing is only about 50 individuals in the town out of over 1,000 households are members. And I imagine we have plenty more elderly than that 50. So we should look for a better attendance. Thank you very much. That's great. Appreciate it. Okay, I see our esteemed town attorney, Ron Bolt, has joined us. And
Yes, hello, Mr. Mayor.
Bob Dalrymple, our counsel that we retained to help us with the discussion of the Corso property and the work associated with that. So with that, I'd like to turn to that. And if I can suggest we do this in the following way. We have in front of us the markup that Todd and I did of the original version of the binding elements that we submitted. And I asked council's review of that as we go through it. But then we also have two additional documents that I think we need to consider, and which I have not built into the document, draft document here, the revisions, because I thought I wanted to make sure we had council deliberation on the two. One is the memo that came from Dan Clahosi on behalf of the Climate and Environment Committee. And the other is the letter that we've heard referenced by two speakers and the residents from Woodside with a number of items that they would like us to consider. So I want to make sure that we systematically go through this and cover all this ground. I will say at the outset, by way of background, which I think is important, and it comes from a conversation which Todd, Rich, and Bob Dalrymple and I had with the planning department, Robert Cronenberg and Elza Hissel-McCoy, just on Friday. And we went through all of our draft proposed binding elements and took on board a number of their comments. And strategically, just for everyone's benefit, one reason why we wanted to get those comments was we felt that the more aligned we in the town are with what the planning department is thinking about, the stronger the case we're going to have joined up with the planning department in respect to the asks that these additional binding elements essentially represent. So we have a very good interest, vested interest really, in trying to enhance that alignment on a lot of the key issues. It will strengthen our hand with the negotiations with the developers. The other thing, though, that came out of that discussion, which also Bob was helpful in illuminating to us, is to recognize that this process obviously will be going on for a long time, and that the first stage that we're really involved with, which is the presentation and then the negotiation of binding elements associated with the local map amendment, the LMA application, which is essentially Corso's request for changing the zoning. And as you may recall from our past conversations, that is really overseen by a hearing examiner. The application goes to the hearing examiner. Hearing examiner then basically delegates it back down to the planning department to review and comment. And ultimately the hearing examiner gets back the recommendation from the planning board. But then the hearing examiner herself will be actually taking testimony and hearing from the town as well as other interested parties before determining what those binding elements should be. And while a lot of those binding elements can be very specific, what I think we've also learned, and Bob, correct me if I'm mistaken, is that there is then the subsequent site plan process. This is where the real detailed work goes on or will be presented by Corso to the planning department and be voted on by the planning board. And a great deal of the details, the granularity of, for example, in the landscaping plan, really are determined and voted on at that point. They are not determined ahead of time at the point where we're just discussing the binding elements for the LMA. So there is a distinction there in granularity that we should be aware of in terms of what we can get into a binding element versus what becomes the greater level of detail that we may still care intensely about, but the right time and place for that is in front of the planning board, where we again will be able to present our views. And again, it will be very important for the developer to be able to have the town's support. So we should not feel that the binding elements is the sole stage where the town has influence in this process. It's a crucial one, so we're not underestimating it, but it's not the only one. And the site plan process that follows the LMA is also another place where we will be intervening. So hey, Joel, thanks for joining. We're just beginning to talk about the binding elements. Record should note Joel Rubin has joined us. So we now have a full 5 members on the council. But Joel was involved in a lesser democratic process in front of 435 people. Why he put that as being more important than our process, I don't know. But hey, you know, people have different priorities. Anyway, I hope that's an accurate statement, Bob. Is that in terms of characterizing this as an overview?
Yes, just one thing to add, if I may, Barney, which is that accompanying the site plan will also be the preliminary plan of subdivision. And I make that distinction because they are 2 different processes, one being the subdivision review pursuant to the subdivision regulations, the other being site plan review under the zoning ordinance. And those will be consolidated for purposes of public hearing and processing following the rezoning application. So there are really two different avenues there that we will be paying attention to and creating that subsequent living document of the Declaration of Covenants with. And the culmination of the preliminary plan of subdivision will be the record plat, and the culmination of the site plan will be the certified site plan. And they are typically processed together as well, and oftentimes in conjunction with the first round of demolition permits or whatever by the applicant. So there's a lot of moving pieces there, but I think you've summarized it properly, that they all kind of, come down into a single lane. There's nuances of what they're called and, what all is involved, but the opportunity is there as you accurately described it.
Okay, but what I'm really driving on this is that there's a level of detail which may not be covered in our binding elements, which doesn't mean we've lost or we can't bring them up. It means that we'll be directing our effort on that level of detail in the subsequent review by the planning department.
Correct. And the level of engineering and planning that goes into
Right.
the drawings is much higher at those later stages.
Okay,
I do have one thing to add, which was kind of enlightening to me as we
but
met,
wait, you've
with,
got to turn on your mic.
as we've met with
Oh,
Robert,
okay, right.
was that their primary review of this centered around the fact of whether they would be able to enforce anything
Very good point.
in these binding agreements. So, and they were very careful to point out that a lot of the detail that we had probably should be deferred to the other processes that we have to go through. So I don't want to make it sound like we're dropping things willy-nilly. We're dropping them because either they're not enforceable, the planning staff wouldn't support them, or they're going to be covered, hopefully covered other places in review.
You're right about that. But just to be clear, they are enforceable from the point of view of the county, but they could still be very important to the town. And so there are several items, as you all know, that had been binding elements, but were dropping down to becoming part of the Declaration of Covenants, which would be between the town and the developer, because that's the more appropriate place for them, because the county, frankly, isn't going to pay attention to it. So they're saying, let's keep the binding elements focused on what the county can enforce. What you guys decide separately, you can still pursue. So with that, the draft I sent around, which had been worked on by Todd, and then in reflecting these conversations, basically the bold is where there's some change language we'd like to add. What is in red and italics would be deleted. I think I would like to characterize most of these as being relatively minor, without a whole lot of real significant change that's pertinent, but there are a couple of things to highlight. But how would you wish to go through this? Do you want to just give me comments? Or I should also say this, per our last meeting, I'm not trying to wordsmith tonight. I want to make sure that we get the sense of the group. And Todd and I, and I'll ask your help too, Rich, can do some wordsmithing and get around a revised version over the next day or two. So would anyone like to open up with any comments on this, or is there just agreement? That's okay too, but where would you like to start?
So I'll go ahead and start. One of the things that I just wanted to reiterate is that with this proposed language in each individual section, that we are putting in language and ensuring that as the binding elements process works its way through to the hearing examiner, that the developer is compelled to also work with us on the Declaration of Covenants. And that, yes, there'll be more covenants added as more details given the subdivision review and the site plan review, that our covenants might be updated accordingly, but there must be a good faith process in working with the county and working with the town in parallel. So I'm not necessarily, except for one area, I'm not necessarily having issues with making sure that what's in red is going to be moved over, except for the one area at the end, which comes to the It was at the.
Well, let me
binding.
first address your first point. It's an excellent one, Irene, and as we've discussed, it is very important to note that we want to make sure that the development of the Declaration of Covenants is something which is worked in parallel, because we will not be giving our approval or consent to this development solely based on progress in the binding elements if we sense that the developer is simply dragging his feet and pushing things away that we also believe need to be taken care of. So we aren't going to say, to put it in, I think the fear you're expressing is the developer saying, oh, well, let's just focus on the binding elements and we'll take up everything else later on.
Yeah.
What you're saying is no, even if something's not in a binding element, it's because the county asked us to take it out because it's only between the town and the developer. Okay, but then that means we have to have that discussion now, so that if you want us to support this plan in front of the hearing examiner,
Yes.
we're able to say to the hearing examiner, not only do we have agreement on the binding elements, but we've also had a constructive engagement on these other points as well, and we're therefore comfortable. So does that capture? where you're heading?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there any comments on the specific?
If I can ask
Sure, please go ahead,
one
Joe.
clarification on that, does that then mean that we have to have an agreement with the county in as well for those elements that are excluded from this, but that require us to demonstrate, cohesion with the county? Or are you comfortable with?
No,
us not
that
doing
would, what the county is saying is, and let's take an example that we shifted from a binding element to the last section, to the Declaration of Covenant, the construction management agreement. Okay, they said that's not something which the county enforces. That's up to the municipality. So okay, then the municipality will take it on. The developer is committed to a construction management agreement, so we have to negotiate that, and we may ask for that matter the county's help. But at the end of the day, it's not something that they plan to enforce. So it's up to us to negotiate that and then ensure that it's enforced. Bob, have I said that properly? Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And by the way, just for everyone's benefit, there's not shifting a great deal. I mean, I think we've had, there's the only things that have fallen down to that category that previously we had as a binding element was the construction management agreement. The 81-foot Thornapple Street setback, that's because that's already an existing declaration of covenant that's between the now effectively Corso and ourselves. The county is not engaged in it, so they're saying it's in the land records, it has to be complied with, but we, the county, we are not going to be the ones who have to enforce it. And then on parking, where we said we want Corso to have an active program to keep its employees and visitors from using town streets. That's again our job, or something we have to work with them on. That's not something that they themselves can enforce. What they can enforce is how many parking spaces have to be built in this facility, and making sure that number is something we're comfortable with. But actually preventing visitors from using town streets is something that falls back on us.
Yeah, Barney, I will say that based on, my experiences of the past, the hearing examiner has oftentimes allowed and maybe even encouraged there to be binding elements that are private matters. Again, this is subsequent to the planning board and the planning staff weighing in on it. But that is usually because there is not a commitment to some further document being made between the applicant and the primary interested, civic or municipality interest that's involved in the case. So what I would be looking for here, and I think that we will, even if the planning staff and planning board do not support it, we will be asking the hearing examiner to support, is a condition that there be this subsequent declaration of covenants that has to be agreed upon prior to a certified site plan being approved. And that, so even if the planning staff and the planning board say that's a private matter that doesn't belong in it, we will be asking the hearing examiner to make that a condition, a binding element.
Right. Okay.
I had a question for Bob. So this is going to a couple comments that Jessica and Ann made earlier that picked up on specifically environmental, what can be done from a building perspective to incorporate as much green infrastructure as possible. It's my understanding that Corso is envisioning LEED silver status for this building. Do they get extra points from the county for going for LEED silver status?
In the CRT zone, there are public benefit points that need to be earned. And it's all based on the density. I don't have it all committed to memory, but this is the simple answer to your question is yes, they will get some public benefit points for a higher level of LEED certification than they're otherwise required to have. But honestly, I don't know of many projects that proceed before the planning board these days where they aren't, at least at the time of sketch plan, which in our instance is going to be a rezoning plan, that the planning board is not at least making a condition of that approval that they demonstrate why they can't get to silver if they're not going to get there. So there's an expectation, I think, especially for a project of this magnitude and this location and this significance. I think that, you know, I don't really think that we should all be given a standing ovation to them for pursuing LEED silver. I think it's an expectation.
Okay, so it's not bronze, it's silver is the minimum. What is the point value difference if they go for platinum?
Well, I think that a platinum is again, yeah, I mean, that's the Super Bowl of it.
No, but what I'm trying to figure out is the juice worth the squeeze if we encourage them to go for a higher LEED status?
There may be some taxation benefits to them. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sure there are some benefits that they would get from it, but I don't really see there being a lot that the town would offer up in terms of saying this really benefits us so much, other than it's a higher degree of, you know, environmentally friendly building. I mean, I do believe that there are some tax benefits to it that they get, maybe even some property tax offsets, but I would have to look that up. I just don't have the answer off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, let me chime in too. I just want to highlight a few of the major items so that everyone's aware of that, including the audience. Joy, is Joy's hand up?
Yes, and I
Go
can.
ahead, Joy.
Sure,
Sorry,
or
I
I
didn't
can
see
just
your
wait
hand.
for you, Barney. I just had a couple of comments about certain elements. So one is, and I did want to just clarify that. So under section C, with respect to landscaping, you know, there's been the Climate and Environment Committee and the Woodside residents have also made a number of comments regarding landscaping. And for me, there's two issues with landscaping on the Corso property. One is the areas of the property that are going to be within the forest conservation easement, which we will not be able to do anything about, nor will Corso. Like once those areas are so designated as a Category 1 forest conservation easement, there's no more planting, there's no more removing. I mean, it sort of is what it is. But the portion of the property that is not within the forest conservation easement should be regulated by our urban forest ordinance or whatever else, as the current property has been so regulated. And so, you know, again, we're not wordsmithing, but I just want to make a comment that whatever we say about landscaping, so one, if we can get them to remove invasive plantings like bamboo, and two, if we can encourage the planting of native species per the terms of the town's urban forest ordinance. And I think that might actually get at the concerns, that I have, that climate and environment have, as well as the Woodside residents with respect to plantings. Another thing is in actually on the buildable portion of the site, I'm not exactly sure whether it's foreseen that trees will need to be removed. But I'm wondering if under this particular binding element, we need to say that, trees will be replaced, or that, an appropriate tree canopy will be maintained on the property per the terms of our urban forest ordinance. Another thing I would like to say about the note that the Woodside residents made, at least with respect to, I would just like to highlight that, their recommendations for an all-electric development, and as use and encouragement of more green infrastructure as is practicable on that site, is also pretty similar to what Climate and Environment Committee members support. And again, that may be not something that we can enforce in binding elements, but that may be we take up during the site plan process. I note, I would like to thank the Woodside residents also for their suggestion about having an annual meeting with the town, maybe in a formal sense, so that we actually go through some of these community issues that are either part of the Declaration of Covenants or other agreements. And so maybe we could add that to items for Declaration of Covenants. With respect to the path, the sidewalk path coming out of Woodside, I can really appreciate the Woodside residents, reluctance to have that opened. As everybody knows, I am a resident of Leland Street, and we have, I think, as many speed bumps on the street as humanly possible, but I don't really like traffic on my street at all, and because it's a cut through, and so there's a lot of unnecessary traffic here. But one thing in terms of balancing the residents there versus the 400 people who eventually will be living on the Corso site, I would, like to ask my neighbors over on Woodside to, maybe look a little bit more kindly at people like me who 20 years from now may actually be living over there, and who would like to avoid all of the noise on Connecticut, to be able to come out and walk on that street. Of the 400 people, most of us who will be 80-year-old ladies living over there, I don't think we're going to be all that disruptive to the kids and everybody else playing on that street. So, I would be supportive of an opening there, and perhaps we can engage with the developers in terms of, controlling that opening there for security and other issues. And then finally, I just would like to note, again, regarding what Climate and Environment wrote to us about their concerns with respect to the binding elements, is, encouraging more pervious surfaces on the actual site. Again, based on what I've just heard, that seems like maybe it's more of a site planning issue, but we would want to keep that in mind, hold that in our back pocket when we get to site planning.
Joy, if I could just make one comment, which is, and I heard it the other day. I'm not sure if Barney and Rich and Todd heard it or not, but the issue of pedestrian circulation and connectivity is not just an issue between the developer and the town. It's actually a finding that the planning staff and the planning board need to make, that there is adequate pedestrian and vehicular circulation and connections to connect communities. It's my belief, and I think I heard it the other day, that that is going to be a requirement of the planning staff, regardless of the position that's taken by the town. So I just think that that's something that we need to go into with our eyes wide open about, that this is maybe bigger than all of us.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Joy, for those comments. I think that sort of pulled in a lot, so let's take everything up. Perhaps if I can offer this thought for proceeding through this, because there's a lot of material. Let me pick out some of the major binding elements we have where we are making some significant changes, and I think that'll begin to wrap into points that Joy has made. And I hope by the time we get through this, we'll cover everything, and we can, at the same time, perhaps then, as Joy has begun to do, take in some of the comments that have been offered by the Woodside and Climate Environment. On 5, on density, we had previously just talked about FAR and leaving it brackets. What the planning department said that they would focus on is the actual number of units. The thought we had was to say, okay, we'll put in language that indicates that ultimately a binding element will contain the actual number of units, but we aren't ready yet ourselves to say what that limit should be, because the real crux of our negotiation is more in regard to height and density. And what we really want to do is wait till the developer comes back with a subsequent proposal that we hope reflects our strong feeling of reducing the height. And only after we see what will be a revised number of units should we then actually weigh in on some number there. Right now, we don't really have any basis, I think, to know what that number should be until we actually go through that negotiation. So that's why there's a proposal in the language to say that ultimately the binding element should include that, but we don't yet know what that actual number should be. So hope that makes some sense. Then we had a very good discussion regarding building heights. As you may recall, they had previously been mostly concerned about the height on Connecticut, and they wanted an alignment of this part of Connecticut with the maximum height that Chevy Chase in DC has agreed for Connecticut, which is 60 feet. And we, of course, said how strongly we felt about bringing down the height of the perimeter buildings on the other 3 sides. So where we've landed is to support basically holding the height around all 4 sides. And what they suggested was actually to, on Connecticut, allow 65 feet instead of 60. But they support our request that we have essentially 4 floors, which in their plans is 55 feet. They also suggested that we go to feet, as they like to put it. Stories is something we tell our children, but who knows how many stories a story is, or how high a story is. So it's better for us to be specific in respect to the number of feet. So that is why we're suggesting the language that on Connecticut it would be 65 feet, and on the other 3 sides the perimeters would be 55 feet.
Is Chevy Chase Lake 65 feet?
No, it's much higher.
So, okay.
So that we, but the planning department, Gwen Wright, the head of the planning department, feels that this section where this property should be more aligned with the feeling, that the sense of what Connecticut is like just inside the district, rather than what it's like further north on Connecticut Avenue. So that's their view. So that's why that wording has been put in that way. The stormwater management, we just say pending. We want to wait till we have the presentation. I think one of the very good points that came from the Climate Environment Committee letter was that we want to hear what's required, but is there a prospect here to actually have a reduction in the stormwater runoff from what is currently on the site going down into the main under meadow? As we know from the incredible storm we had with the flood tide that went down, down Maple, but that's receiving the Meadow Lane water eventually. That obviously, if we're able to actually get a net reduction in flow out from the Corso property, that essentially provides a little bit of extra volume capacity for, you know, water flows from the rest of the town, which obviously we expect to be greater over time. So I think on Wednesday, when we have our presentation from the county, we'll want to listen carefully and see if there's some room there to shape the binding element from stormwater management that could actually give us a net benefit. The exterior wall facade, I think we were encouraged to, we put in language that actually was blunter than had we had drafted before, and that came from discussion with the planning board. On landscaping, I think this is one generally where they believe that a lot of this will actually come out in site plan in that level, that's where the specificity of this really sits. But I think we already have in it that we want landscaping materials to be primarily native species. So that's something we've already have in our draft. I personally would open this for discussion. An example of getting rid of invasive plants and getting rid of the bamboo, I think is fine. And as a practical matter, in supporting a new vegetative screening, you're going to have to take out the bamboo because otherwise there's no place to plant the higher trees that are envisioned there.
But environmentally sound ways of getting rid of the bamboo.
Yeah, I'd be surprised, but Bobby can speak whether the means of doing this is something in a binding element as opposed to a site plan review, but it strikes me as that would be kind of granular for a site for a binding element.
Yeah, it's a site plan review. Forest conservation plan is going to be approved with the subdivision and site plan, and as part of that forest conservation plan, there'll be very, very detailed descriptions of what they need to do, and they have to enter into an agreement in terms of exactly how they're implementing the forest conservation plan, including removal of, they can't just go out there and pour gasoline all over it. Not that works, and not that I've tried that, but they're pretty specific, and the environmental staff at Park and Planning, I think, is going to be your friend on this one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Please go ahead.
I wanted to address one of the residents' comments is that the current regulations that we have for pesticides and herbicides would take care of them putting anything like a dirt span or they wouldn't be allowed to do that. So, and I imagine that shows up in the site plan.
Well, I think we should make sure that it does. I think the planning staff, should incorporate the strengths of what you have in your local ordinances should be incorporated into the central document. I think so that it's all right there for everyone to see, and there's no questions about it.
While we're on that one,
Yeah, please, sure.
I'm still confused about whether or not once they get approval of all of the site plans and we get a certified site plan, whether or not the property that's not in the conservation easement would be subject to the town's ordinances. So I'm still not hearing from anybody about the issue of whether our town's ordinances, especially the urban forest ordinances, remain intact for those areas of Corso that are not going to be in the forest conservation easement.
Ron, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. It's not an issue we've focused on yet because we're focused on negotiation of the binding elements, but frankly the town code applies unless a different determination is made later.
What about a determination made in the site plans or one of those plans that says, or as they go to the site plan and the landscaping stuff is in there and they say they want to take, as part of the forest conservation part of that process, they say they want to take out trees that are not in the forest conservation easement. I mean, that's prior to, and therefore we wouldn't have any say.
Well, we would, if the town code is applied, then you know, the developer presumably would seek concurrent approvals from.
Ron, let me get at it this way, because it's a very important question for us to consider and be aware of. Even though there's, let's say, the landscaping will be reviewed carefully and have to go be part of part of the certified site plan. And let's say that they, as part of that landscaping process, they plan to take down a number of canopy trees in the 9 acres that will not be, that'll be developed basically. And that's going to be the case, that we can see that on the plans. I guess I had thought, but please correct me if I'm wrong, or if you have if how it should be seen, that the county doesn't have a senior right to essentially void our tree ordinance. So effectively, the developers have to get approval from the town, and by way of a variance, if they want to take down some canopy trees that would otherwise be protected. And they also need to get the landscaping elements approved as part of the site plan. They have to do both those things, but it doesn't mean they can do one and then say that therefore they don't have to do the other.
That's correct. Yeah. The county does not have the power to declare town ordinances inapplicable.
Okay, so we don't, between Ron and Bob, your opinion is that we don't need to put something in landscaping in the binding element that says to the effect the town ordinances apply for those areas outside the forest conservation easement.
No, we don't.
Yeah, in my judgment, you do not. It's a matter of law.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful clarification. Appreciate that. But it also does point out to another important part of the town's influence in the later process, because they will have to come back to us and ask for variance, we presume, in respect to the urban forest ordinance. On fencing, we made a significant change, proposed a significant change of wording there. Previously, it had just been to keep it at a minimum, and we did see the note from Woodside in that regard, that the residents who live right along the property would very much like their fence to stay in place, which I went over and looked at today. Yep, there's a big wood fence there in front of the Langman's house, and then a wire fence. And looking closely at the maps, it appeared that fencing is on Corso's property. It's not on the property of the two residences. What Todd suggests here in the language that was now in front of us is simply saying that in regard to fencing, Corso will install fencing as depicted in the concept plan. I mean, that's all we know right now. It's specific. Obviously, they want to make changes, they'll come back and talk to us, but that's a very clear way of saying it. And I think what we could add is, and we'll also ensure, and I don't know what the words would be, but effectively that side yard fences for those two residences would also be maintained in some satisfactory way. I don't know quite what the wording would be, but essentially saying that it would be okay to have, that we would ask that as part of a binding element, that the fencing that already is there be maintained or improved, but specifically adjacent to the residences. I'm not talking about at the cul-de-sac itself.
Yeah, maintained or improved.
Right.
That would be key.
Okay, but I think it's certainly a fair ask that the Langemans and their family on the other side, who currently have fences, would be expected to have them maintained as side yard fences.
And that wooden fence was on Corso property.
That's what it looked like on the map. Now, I'm not the
Surveying.
expert, but Todd and our lawyers could go through it. But it looked to me that the boundary, the boundary of the land itself shows that the fences are inside the Corso property.
And the vegetative screening that Woodside Place is also asked, would that be behind or in front of that same fencing?
Would it be, that would be further into the Corso property.
Further into the Corso
Right.
property.
Yeah.
And I
think
sent
that
around a
depends on
picture
property.
today. There actually already is a fair amount of vegetative screening
Right.
in place that's probably 30 or 40 feet high. It's not like it's not in front of the Langeman's house. It's at the side of the house facing Connecticut.
Side of the house facing Connecticut. Okay,
But it's an example of what can be done, so it's useful,
right.
Called a living fence.
right?
Living.
The one thing that we've left on the fencing, and this goes back to landscaping, Woodside residents asked for at least 60 feet. I think the question there is, and the reason why it's left blank still tonight, but I'm happy to explain the situations. I've checked with Todd, and we have to go back to Tolbert. If we're talking about a very dense screen, that creates a huge amount of wind resistance. And so there has to be some care in terms of how high it's safe to have trees.
Or they'll
in light
just
of wind.
topple over on the
Sure, yeah.
houses. Yeah.
So I'm not comfortable, just speaking for me personally, but I wasn't comfortable putting a specific height at this time until we've all studied that and understand from the forester's perspective what is a safe height that you could have a dense screen. I will assert, but I don't know, but I presume there's a different view depending upon how thick the screen is, right? That if you have openness between the trees can grow higher and be safe, but the denser you want it, and I assume that the residents are asking for something dense, there could be an issue there about the height. So we want to make sure that whatever height we recommend is defensible as being safe. Exterior lighting, the planning department had said that and Bob helped me out here, and Todd and Rich, because I frankly was a little bit unsure myself, that they don't really use dark sky as such. They use the bug lighting system and set standards. So I wasn't quite clear how we actually make sure that we're being comforted that low lighting will be required.
Yeah, as part of the site plan review process, they have to approve a lighting plan, and what it shows, the lighting plan will show what's called foot candles, which is the measurement of how much light is being thrown onto the site, both from internal sources and external sources. And so they typically will condition the site plan on having a certain established maximum foot candle at the property line. And again, it's above my pay grade, but I seem to recall that a typical standard at the perimeter is a quarter foot candle, which is fairly minimal lighting, but that is all part of the site plan review process. And they don't call it the dark sky ordinance. They do regulate it through, and there is a specific lighting regulation that they apply. And if you'd like, I'll try to get it over to Todd so that he has it. But there is established guidelines in terms of how much lighting they can have at various points of the site, including internal to the site, including a requirement that they will have as part of the lighting plan. It won't just be the foot candle plan, it'll be lighting fixtures and details of the lighting fixtures, and having encasements around lights that are in the parking areas so as to prevent any spill. So it's a pretty thorough look at the lighting levels, both interior to the site and as you reach the perimeter of the property and beyond.
Rich?
So are we to assume that Chevy?
Rich had.
Okay.
Well, I was, during the meeting with Robert, again, it was one of those things I was surprised to the extent at which the county is going to be looking at that as part of the plan. And I did look at part of the county, some of the county past plans on some of these things. And they go into such detail as, like, if there's those residential units on the side, those fixtures will have to have some kind of screening over them so they don't throw the light out against the residences. But that all comes up in site plan, in their lighting plan.
However, when you go by something like Chevy Chase Lake, and where there are residences on two sides, I can't imagine that those residents are happy with the light that's being thrown off that development. So there's the regulation, but I'm not sure that's what, certainly it isn't what dark skies is talking about.
Well, okay, but there's a difference
So-
between what the light that comes from people's windows, which obviously is going, are you talking specifically about the
Fixtures that
fixtures
are
around on the ground? Okay. I guess the question, this is a practical one, and all I'm doing the wordsmithing I'll be looking for is, how do we capture our concern about lighting in a binding element, knowing that
Knowing the heights are.
knowing
as
that,
they
well, no,
are
but
as
knowing the
well. Yeah.
details of that are really going to be worked out in site plan. And actually, my hunch is that frankly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rich or Todd or Bob, but you know, they may ultimately, may not be any binding element dealing with lighting at all, because they'll say it will be dealt with in site plan. But I'm just trying, it's such an important issue to us. I don't want to drop it out. So I want to find the right words to convey our concern, even if in a sense it's more a political point, recognizing that ultimately it's going to be redressed in site plan. But I'm just looking for what are the words we should have that capture the issue at a general level, when obviously we aren't able to go through a calculation of foot candles and, you know, perimeter shielding of light from getting into neighboring areas.
Sure.
Well, I do think that it's, I do agree it's a site plan issue, and the lighting plan and the fixture plans will be part of that approval and ultimately the certified site plan. I mean, if you felt strongly enough about it, I would suggest to you that you get a lighting consultant on board.
And down the road we might, but we're not doing that between now and Thursday.
Then I would agree that it shouldn't be a binding element. All I was going to say, Barney, is if you felt that strongly about it, you could have a binding element that would mandate that foot candles be at a certain level at the perimeter at the time of site plan. I think it's way premature to do that, frankly.
Yeah, we can't, we have our time doing that. All right, we'll move that over. On the forest conservation easement planning, another change there, we had originally said we wanted the Corso and the town to agree, and then we'd go to the planning board. I guess it's not surprising the planning board was not very happy with that thought, but they made a valid point, which is that they're going to be on top of this issue. They're going to want to be on the site even during construction. They're going to want to make subsequent adjustments and changes, and they don't want any erosion of their authority over something which is clearly vested to the county. So I think what we're left with is that our town forester will be engaged through the entire process. Well, I'm confident that our interests will be certainly listened to. And we also know that if it's going to be a forest conservation 1 area anyway, that's actually a pretty rigorous definition of being left alone. So there's not really a whole lot that we should necessarily be worried about. The other changes on the traffic study, they really, and I think I'm not surprised they made this point that, you can't prejudge or demand what SHA is going to do. You have to have that determination of need before you can take action. So there's some change there. Those are the major points, which I think overall don't really represent a very significant change on any of the things we care about the most. But in the meantime, what we've gained is their strong support for what we do know we've cared a great deal about, which is the issue of the height on the perimeters on all 4 sides. And I also feel that they've endorsed everything else that we have in here. I mean, this is something which they will see as essentially, while they may still take issue on some things, they're going to say, yes, substantially, the town of Chevy Chase's requests and our submissions are reasonable. And that's a very important endorsement, I think, for us to be able to get.
I did want to not leave the thought out. Both Irene and one of the residents were concerned, or it may have been you, Beth, about the continuing annual meeting, some kind of a commitment there.
I've taken note of that.
And so, yeah, we could probably just add that as something in there.
Right. And I want to make 2 other points which are important, which go to the Woodside letter. First, Joy, you brought up the path, and I'm in complete agreement with you. I think that path is essential, and I understand also Bob's point about something the county will require. I think we've had this discussion with the residents. We do understand their feelings of, how lovely their cul-de-sac is with very little traffic and the privacy that offers. But these are public sidewalks for the entire town. And we all sort of have to have our own center of gravity of how we, as council members, represent the entire town. And Joy, you emphasized the issue of yourself 20 years on needing a walker. I don't think that's true, by the way. I think you're going to be just fine. But I think we are obligated under the town charter to be looking out for the convenience and safety of residents, and to have elderly residents being told that for the convenience of a few residents who like their privacy, you are going to have to go out and walk along Connecticut Avenue. I cannot support that. I just cannot. I feel it very strongly. And I also feel the reverse is important, that there will be plenty of residents who will enjoy wanting to walk to get to the coffee shop or the ice cream parlor, and may have kids with them, toddlers. And are we going to say to those families that you must walk out on Connecticut to get to the ice cream parlor with your toddler in tow, hoping he doesn't trip into a lane of fast-moving traffic because some residents want to keep their cul-de-sac without additional traffic? I'm sorry, but I just don't see that way. I think we have to look out for the interests of all the residents, including those at Corso, including those in the town who may wish to avail themselves of convenience here. And also, it's important in terms of balance. One of the things that came out in our discussion at the Walk-in-R was that some of the anxiety that people over on Thornapple had about a path was a perception that they had that the path was only going to be on their side. And they felt aggrieved that they would have to absorb that. And they felt much better realizing that there would be two paths, as well as, of course, going out Connecticut, but one on each side, of course, so into the town. And I think we would be in extreme difficulty if we now said to one set of residents, okay, we'll have blockage here, but then the other set still has to take a path. So I think that issue, and I'm just speaking personally, to me is closed. I think that path is important. We have to respect concerns of residents, but these are public sidewalks, and town residents are allowed to use public sidewalks. The other comment, though, that's my view, and I don't want to prejudge how you will all feel about that. But I speak to it because obviously it's something which this group of residents feel strongly about, so they deserve a candid response. The other issue is, which we need to touch on, is whether we wish to support the request that the setback go to 80 feet. Just to review this a bit, there are really two buildings on the south side. The building on the southwest is actually going to be 120 feet back from the property line of the resident on Woodside, 120 feet. And there's going to be a forest conservation easement for a lot of that area that's going to protect in any event there. So that's 120 feet. Then the developers are removing the caretaker's house, which is only 35 feet or so back from the property line at Woodside. And then you've got the new building, which is going to go up, which is a U-shaped building with a prong sort of pointing south, which is closer to Connecticut. And the back part of the U, the northern part of that U is also about 120 feet. But then the two prongs stick forward, if you will, coming south. And it's the end of those prongs that are 60 feet. So I can understand a request to say, look, can you push those two prongs back so they're 80 feet away from us? But I find myself ambivalent for the following reason, is that none of these designs are final. And the developer, we're putting a lot of pressure on the developer to lower the height. That's what seems to have mattered the most to people. They aren't obligated to leave the buildings where they are. They could come back with a revised plan that moves the dimensions of those buildings, and potentially where a building is 120 feet, maybe that moves closer to the Woodside. I mean, they're going to try to find ways to put up apartments. So we could ask for a change, but and maybe we should agree to the 80 feet request and put it in as an ask. But I just want to say that this is one of those examples where you can also get unintended consequences in terms of how things ultimately play out. So anyway, those are two key points that were in the letter, in addition to the ones where I think we're all in agreement with the residents on. But I felt we needed to review both of those. So I would open it up in respect to both the question of the path, because we've heard from Joy, but I'd be welcome to thoughts from the other three of you, and also on the 80 feet.
I do want to weigh in on the connectivity issue, because I think the connectivity, both Corso and the planning department in our discussions were just insistent. They're going to have connectivity with Connecticut. I think our issue ought to be how that looks. And I'm completely in sympathy both with the residents of Woodside. I don't want to see a sidewalk from the sidewalk on Connecticut Avenue directly down the side of that building onto Woodside. That's just a no-brainer for me. You don't want to have that kind of direct access.
And that's still in our binding element.
Yeah, and that's still in the that is in our binding element. And I think we could work with Corso to develop that path that they're going to have, because they insist on it for the connectivity of their whole community, but specifically for the residents who have those outside units. And one of the things the county said is that we must have connectivity for those people on those outside of those units, right, to access the public thoroughfares. So I think we can, as they and they've pretty much said that they would, like, took off that direct connection to Connecticut, and so it follows the path of what I'll call their exterior paths, and not directly onto Connecticut Avenue. So I would hope we.
Yes, I wasn't suggesting changing
that.
So,
so I hope we maintain that.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that.
On the issue of the greater setback, I too am ambivalent, because I'm concerned. This is a balloon that we're dealing with in terms of this development, in terms of the density. So if we take density away from one side of this thing, they've got to push. They will push. They've got to have a certain number of units, which we don't know what they are yet, but they need that for their business. They're going to have it. So they're going to. If we say we want you to take away here, it's going to go somewhere else. That density will go somewhere else. And in looking at if we do appropriate landscaping, we do all of the kinds of things there. I'm not sure about increasing the density, the setback to 81 feet on that side. That's just my.
Well, on everyone's feet.
Yeah,
thank you. Irene.
Thank you. So I wonder if, I don't know what order to go in here. I'm kind of coming around to thinking it's not a declaration of covenants, but maybe a design considerations letter where we express through the council resident concerns, one of which being this particular setback that occurs on one side by a covenant, but Woodside Place would also like to see this. And in a letter expressing other things such as, why not go for LEED Gold? Why not consider renewable energy, all electric? Why not think about extending the setback on Woodside Place as well? And not something that, we are demanding or this will be put in comment, but it's something, it's just so that there's an understanding. This is the feedback we're getting from the neighbors that are closest to the property. So design considerations letter is all that I could think of. Something with, because obviously the pathways are a deep concern for Thornapple as well as Woodside Place. One of the things that I want as a council, which I know I'm going to go a little bit separate for a second, to consider, and as liaison to the Public Services Committee, is I think maybe proactively we have to consider putting in a zoned parking permitted parking situation for Thornapple and Woodside Place ahead of when construction starts. So when that happens, you know, whatever, but not trying to have future councils beholden to it, but something that we might want to consider so that it assuages just a little bit of concern that has come up. A second part is while I was walking with going through the walk in our was it last Saturday? I don't even remember.
Last Saturday. That's right. It always seems ages ago.
It just, the days keep going. There was, I sat, if you will, ended up sitting with a couple of residents along the way to just kind of get a sense of where they were feeling. And there was a resident that came up with an interesting suggestion about the pathways and the potential concern about, look, the commercial retail establishments that are going to be on Corso are not going to be open 24/7. Maybe they're going to close at 10, 11 p.m. Maybe they open up at 6 a.m. I'm just making it up here. I have no idea if a florist would open at 6 a.m. And therefore, is there an opportunity here? And this comes up to the design considerations to have some sort of a mechanized gate that would automatically close at 11 at the Thornapple and Woodside Place and automatically open up again at 6 a.m. You know, something, I'm making up time frames here, with the idea being that it would be automatic. Of course, if, you know, are we thinking about fencing the entire thing or whatever? No, but we're trying to create a situation that enables the residents that might feel a little bit uncomfortable about a pathway that would be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week open, that there would be some additional security. Keeping in mind, I am a firm belief that the security is going to be far better than what it has ever existed throughout all the years that 4-H was there. This is going to be between the 24/7 security, the probably motion lighting, motion sensor lighting that will, it's going to be far superior than what exists today. But I'm getting a sense from reading these letters over time that there is a sense of concern about having that access open continuously. So maybe this is a compromise, if you will, that might help. So that's all I had.
Any thought about the 80-foot setback?
Well, that's what I was thinking, that could be put into.
Put in the letter rather
Put
than
in
be
the
put in as a
design
binding.
considerations
Gotcha.
letter saying, you know, we, as a whole, the town council, and it seems like planning as well, you know, no more than 50 feet. However, we're also feeling from certain residents as well that the setback, but what can be done here?
Right.
You know, just, they're the experts. I mean, they're the architects. They're the, you know, I've never designed a building, but maybe they could think of a way and still get the number of units that they want.
Okay, thank you. Joel?
I mean, I hate to admit,
You got to turn on your mic.
No, I have nothing really to add. I mean, I concur with the tenor of what you're all.
Okay. Joy, do you want to comment on the setback? I know we heard you about the path, but I don't think you had a chance to comment on the setback.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that is the reason I didn't comment on it is I guess it was, you know, your fear as well that we ask for more there that might sort of, if we ask for more setback, that might cause them to want to ask for more height. And I think, you know, what I heard on the Wacanar as well as before when we saw their renderings, just, you know, the deep concern for, you know, really high buildings. So I think Irene's suggestion is a good one, that if we were to have a separate side letter that's like, these are some suggestions that you may wish to consider that may, you know, that might not rise to the level of a binding element, but are some considerations. Because my fear would be that we have otherwise greater building heights, and I am definitely not in favor of higher buildings.
Okay, good. Thank you. There's been very helpful discussion. Value for our consultation. The other one that also rises in these things is that you can have step backs. And so you could also have a situation where there'd be 3 floors and then step back and then a 4th floor and step, you know, so there are different ways where an architect can come back and suggest things to be done. But I think what you suggested, Irene, I like that idea. That allows us to convey things that we're still interested in, but not quite at the same level as we are putting into the binding element language. So it allows us to maintain the ability to have the dialogue and discussion with the developer, but not in the exact sort of binary, you know, yay or nay kind of quality, which the binding elements themselves otherwise.
It also gives, I think it also gives the developer a clue of what we're going to focus on in the site plan.
Right.
So I think it's fair, you know, we want to put them on notice sooner rather than, we don't want to get the site plan hearing and all of a sudden dump it on them. Let's do it sooner rather than later.
Okay, good. Todd or Bob, do you have any comments before we move on?
I do have just a couple, Barney, and I'll try to be brief here, but I think a lot of what I just heard and about this side letter relates to the issue of compatibility, which as we know from all of the discussions we've had over the last year or so, is the central finding that needs to be made by the hearing examiner and ultimately the county council. And I think if they're couched in terms of that we think that these issues are central to the findings of compatibility, and we would encourage you, the developer, to look at these seriously. It also will put the planning staff, the planning board, the hearing examiner, and ultimately the council on notice of what the town feels is important for that finding of compatibility. Because without a finding of compatibility, the council cannot approve this. They just flat out cannot approve it. And that ties into the paths as well. Creating a new community, you know, in the center of the town that can't be connected to the rest of the town, I think by definition is incompatible. So I think that these are all issues that need to be kind of wrapped into that bow of, these are things that need to be seriously looked at and considered in finding compatibility with the rest of the town and the rest of the community, frankly. Just a couple of other quick things. And the step back also fits in that category, Barney. I think that we've talked about the wedding cake and how important it is for building height to step back from perimeter to center site. A couple other things I jotted down here just to raise as questions. We've talked a lot about the retail and the nature of the retail, and we have some suggested binding elements to the retail. And my question for you all is, how important is that retail? Is that something that you want some assurances that it is going to occur, or do you only care that if it does occur, that it be in a certain way or certain size? Because these things do have a tendency, you know, if a community really wants the retail, because it does create this sense of community and connectivity and compatibility and all those wonderful things, then we need to consider having something that requires there to be, you can't force retail where it doesn't, where the market doesn't exist, but you can, tie them to having certain spaces set aside for retail. And it's relevant right now. If you've been paying attention to Nationals Park, it's turned into a huge issue at Nationals Park, because delivering on the neighborhood retail was central to that area agreeing to allowing Nationals Park to occur there. And now the developer's saying that we're not going to do it. The market's not there and we're just not going to do it. And it's gotten to the point where the District of Columbia is considering shutting down Nationals Park, as strange as that sounds. So I would encourage you to at least think about it and have that discussion as to whether that's something that is important to you or important only if it actually happens. The last thing that I wrote down here is, because I've heard also a few times tonight about this annual meeting and the need for almost required dialogue between the developer and the town. In many of my zoning cases over the years where there's been significant community involvement, there has been a binding element requiring the formation of a citizen advisory committee, or a CAC, which is a structured, organization, if you will, that has designated memberships from the development community and from the developer and from the community and from the town. And it has required meetings as part of that. I'm not suggesting you do it. I'm just making you aware that that is a tool that I have had happen in many of my cases, and many of my more controversial cases that ended up with getting local community support. In Friendship Heights, for instance, with the Chevy Chase Center and the village of Friendship Heights, that was a central component to that. With Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring, that was a central component to that. I don't know if you have an interest in that. I'm just bringing it to your attention that it's something that maybe you should give some consideration to and have a discussion if you want it or don't want it. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Any comments on what Bob suggested? Joel?
I mean, the only comment I have is that, Bob, I appreciate your point. I think that the Corso folks are looking at the retail more as a convenience for their future tenants. I think it's a guarantee that there's going to be some retail in there, and I would bet that the Corso development would subsidize it to keep it there as well.
They've already said they will. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you all. So take all this on board. I think the idea of a side letter helps a lot, sort of relieving a little bit of the pressure on exactly what's in this, but it gives us a chance. And we'll try to turn this out quickly. As you know, I have a sunset date of my involvement on this on Thursday night when we depart from our trip. And I'd very much like to get this out. So we're working on it quickly. I look forward to your prompt response. I may want some help in drafting of the side letter. I will call upon folks to help with that, but I don't think the changes themselves in this are all that major. And I do want to thank the Climate and Environment Committee for their letter. And Joy, when you convey, please make sure they understand that there's a lot that's in this, that if we don't take up now in the binding element, we will be coming back to review at the time of the site plan. So that's important to convey. And also thanks, Anne, to the letter from Woodside. I think there are a number of your comments that we have indeed taken on board, not all of them, but a number of them, and it's all been very helpful. So thank you. With that, we have a number of other things to discuss. My guess is we have about an hour to go. I think we ought to take a break for 5 minutes, come back, and then we go through B through F as rapid. Well, I have, at some point, the mayor will decide when the quality of discourse falls far enough off that it's pointless to continue. So let's take a 5-minute break. And
am I dismissed, Mr. Mayor?
You're never dismissed, Bob, but you're allowed to leave.
Okay, have a good evening. And thank you, Mr. Bolt, for once again disgracing me for your attire.
Rod, however, we're going to need you because we're going to be talking about the ethics and also, what's the other one that we're going to,
Small cell.
5G, ethics and 5G. So we
Okay.
need your help still.
Have a good evening.
Okay, great.
Good night, Bob.
Okay, good. Joy's back. Just one last comment. On the Corsa matter, just explaining to everyone here that I did get some comments. We all of us got some comments from Ken Rubin late this afternoon, and I'll also be considering those in further revision. Moving on to the Farm Women's Market project, that's just a report. But I've had a chance to talk to each of you privately, but I want to make sure it's on the public record that the county has come back with a revised structure for ownership of the different of the project, which actually probably is very helpful, but it needs to be clear, and I want it on the record. The county had previously expected that it would still own the land on which the parks are going to sit. What they're now proposing is that up front, they will turn over technically is a condominium unit of the surface land, which will have the park on lot 24 to the Parks Department. And they will turn over the ownership of the land on lot 10, the one between Leland and Willow, to the Parks Department. Having done that, the county will not be further involved in the development of those two parks. And instead, what will take place will basically be a funding agreement. Well, first, there'll be a agreement for the Parks Department to develop those two parks, which they would do otherwise anyway, but they would formally be vested with that authority. And we, the town, will enter into an agreement with the Parks Department for our share of the funding of those two parks. Meanwhile, effectively, the county and the developers will be responsible for building the garage. That actually is, for all of us who've looked at that, including our counsel, Francois Carrier, actually makes a lot of sense and simplifies the structure. And from the county's point of view, it simplifies their involvement because they really don't want to be involved in the parks particularly. And they realize their focus really is the public garage. In terms of funding for this, it's also advantageous. It means that the parks financing is provided entirely by the Parks Department. They will be putting in $2.5 million of their own money, and they will be channeling $2.5 million from the state. So they will be effectively in control of $5 million going into the parks. The town will be putting in $4.5 million and channeling another $1 million that we'll be receiving from the state. So we'll effectively be putting in $5.5 million. So that $10.5 million does meet the budget. There's also, I think, about $1 million of contingency in that budget. And if that's not enough, we'll have to see what we do. But in any event, that's really where we will be focusing our money. And of course, those are the things that we care most about. Separately, there's still about $300,000 or so. I'm sorry, of our $5.5 million, $300,000 would still go to the garage in a separate agreement to finish off the funding for the garage. But we would essentially be virtually not involved in the garage at all. And I would also suggest not involved in any potential cost overruns of the garage, which is a good thing. So I think there's a lot to be said for this new agreement. However, the crux at the moment is how important it is that the budget resolutions get to the county council in time for this county council to approve the new structure. And there are two pieces of this. There's $9.5 million, which the county is appropriating. And then separately, there's the $2.5 million coming from the Parks Department. Ultimately, both of these amounts have to be approved by the county council. And so in our group meetings, we've emphasized the importance of looking at the clock of when this county council goes out of existence, which is effectively at the end of November, and working back for how much time is needed by the county to review the packets that will come in asking for these appropriations, and making sure there's enough time for a hearing, for, Fed committee review, whatever it is, and that they can get the job done. And then that in turn says, what's the date by which, the Parks Department with its $2.5 million and the Department of Transportation with a $9.25 million actually have to get their work together to make the submission. So that's what's in course right now. Joel and Todd and I will be on the phone on Wednesday for another discussion. We're now meeting with our partners twice a month instead of only once a month. So we expect to hear further update on this. That's where it stands. I think the full court press is to support the county and parks in what they have to submit so that the approvals can come from this county council. Part of the packets will be a memorandum, and they will be asking for a letter from the town as well, supporting the overall project and committing, saying what our commitment is in our resolution. We obviously can't, we have to see what that memorandum is and agree with it so we can be comfortable putting in the support letter. So we'll be engaged to that extent in the development of this packet. But that's what I think will be the crux of the work over the next 6 weeks, trying to make sure that this can actually get to the county council. And again, we are getting very good support from Andrew Friedson on this. He's working as well to try to encourage the county to be prompt. So that's really all I have to say about that. Todd, is there anything else? Joel, anything else you're saying?
Nothing else, thanks.
Okay. With that, let's move on to sure.
The only thing is we briefed long range planning committee about this, so they're now getting engaged, thinking about it. So
good. No, I'm glad you did. I see that Deedon is on, but not
yeah, we had
but Deedon, of course,
good first meeting last week with Ellen as
good.
Sure.
And there will be a lot of documents and stuff for us to review. So there'll be good work coming down. Okay. Todd, over to you for Copeland Run.
Sure, this can be a short discussion. I can follow up with any detail in an email. But our engineer, Clark Azar, we've asked them to provide a concept plan and cost estimate for the Copeland Run stream stabilization in order to protect the town right of way and Lynn Drive from future degradation. As you'll note, it's a relatively small amount of money for the improvements for which we can use our allocated ARPA funds. And although we believe the county has some responsibility here for maintaining what we believe is, or at least functions as a county storm sewer, rather than negotiate a cooperative agreement or at least a cost sharing arrangement with the county, I'm of the opinion that the town should proceed with these improvements and distinguish them from future improvements to what might solely function as a stormwater management system in Copeland Run upstream that is ultimately, owned and maintained by the county. So my recommendation here is that we proceed with these improvements to Copeland Run and use ARPA funds for that purpose.
Okay. Any comments?
Thank you. Thanks for all that work and working with them. I have one question, maybe two, depending. With the restoration efforts that's been proposed, what type of storm event is that bringing us to? So for example, are we going from 3 months to 2 year storm event, a 2 year to do we have an idea about that?
We don't. There is no storm event. There is no storm event to which we are designing. We're just stabilizing the stream bank so it protects our right of way in Lynn Drive for what we believe will be quite some time. I mean, we don't believe that the degradation of Lynn Drive will occur for another couple of years, at least a couple of years, but at least 10 years. But we see the impact to Copeland Run proceeding to the point where it will threaten Lynn Drive in the relatively near future, but we're not designing to a certain storm event. For stream stabilization projects and riprap, that's really not designed to a specific storm event. The county designs its storm drain system to a 10-year storm event, and that's what capacity it can handle within its pipes, its closed system. I don't believe they have any standard for open systems, and this is an open system, so we're not designing to any specific storm event.
So with that, would now have my second question. So since you were saying that it's really the county should bear some responsibility, but because we have this ARPA funding, we're thinking of applying that. Let's say there is a storm event that occurs that creates a situation for the system that's currently in place for the county where, you know, because I've seen that huge pipe and the water comes and eventually ends up along the Lynn Drive / the Copeland Run. What if something happens where the county then turns around and said, it's because of the work that you did that it caused effectively more damage than if you just left it?
Well, the county's washing its hands of the whole project, as is the DEP. Both the DEP and the state are saying because the Copeland Run runs through private property, it's the responsibility of the property owners to maintain it. So they're washing their hands of all of it. So I highly doubt that they would be able to come back and say any improvements we did resulted in worsening conditions for them to ultimately improve. All we're doing is just stabilizing the stream so it doesn't further erode and come closer to town right of way and Lynn Drive.
Thank you.
And also, the work will be subject to permitting, so there'll be probably a county sediment control permit, but there's actually a state Department of Environment stream disturbance permit, and there's also a combination state and federal permit because we'll be adjusting the floodplain. So that'll be evaluated as part of the engineering plans that are developed. So that's sort of the assurance that the work we do is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I didn't recognize you standing at the podium. I didn't know who the bald guy was. Thank you, Dave. That's exactly right. The permitting requirements will ensure that they can't further or in the future tell us that we did something wrong.
They'll be pregnant. Okay.
Quick question on that. And how much after roughly 200,000, how much do we know we'll have left from our ARPA funds?
Oh, we got 2.
A lot.
We have 2.2 million let's see, how many?
About 2.2 million or close to 2.1 million left after Copeland.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We got plenty, right? In terms of, because as we do with all of our ARPA appropriations, we usually introduce it and then vote on it in a subsequent council. Do you want to bring that up next month for our review or vote in December? What's your sense of timing?
I think it'll take a while for the plans to be developed. What do you think, Dave? Do you think we'll
just let us know when you want us to take a vote as well.
We will, definitely. We will.
Yeah, so this is, hopefully council gives us concurrence to take the next step, which is to have a boundary and topo survey done. We've done preliminary outreach to the affected residents to make sure that they'll actually let us get onto their property to make the improvements.
Good. Okay. That's fine. So there's time basically. Okay.
The final cost, and then we'll read the council.
Right. By the way, did we receive the check for the second half?
We did. We did.
This will be quick.
You were just assuming it was such an obvious
Who actually
no-brainer, right?
owns that? Who actually owns that land there?
Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
There's one parcel that's cooperatively owned by 4 of the adjacent residents, and then the other parcel is 7508 Lynn Drive. I have his name if you want, but
No.
yeah, there's
No, I was just curious because what you said was that they're responsible for the improvements of that area. So we're taking on, as the town, the responsibility for what those residents are supposed to be doing, right?
so
Correct?
there's a responsibility, is my understanding, but not an obligation. So they're free to let that stream erode and
Right. Okay. Got it.
take whatever course it ultimately takes.
All right.
So in order to prevent the undermining of Lynn Drive.
Yeah.
we need to-
I got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I think it's actually a perfect use of the ARPA money. This is exactly what it's for. It's right down the fairway of it. Let's not stint. Let's do it right. If you come back and say it's an extra 50,000, I'm not going to be personally upset. I want to make sure that we make a repair and improvement that's going to be lasting when we have these funds available for exactly this purpose.
Yeah, I agree, Barney, and I think it's valuable to understand that we are doing this solely for the purpose of ensuring the viability and sanctity of Lynn Drive and our right of way, and not going further upstream to further improve any type of open channel county storm drain.
Right, right. Good. Okay, with that, we move on to the public ethics law. Do you want to give Evelyn a call? Was she going to join us?
Yes, I will right now.
I've asked Evelyn Chung, who's the new chair of our Ethics Commission, to give us the quick overview of the commission. I think you all realize the commission is not a committee. In other words, it has its own separate life and requirements. It's not just an advisory organ back to the council. But nonetheless, I thought it appropriate as a matter of governance to make sure we heard from the Ethics Commission about this change. And also we'll be hearing from Ron.
Evelyn has been notified. Ron, do you want to tee it up?
Start, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like.
Ron, you would like Ron to start?
Yeah, sure. We're waiting for Evelyn, right? Yeah, Ron can start.
Okay, so as you are all aware, state law requires municipalities of a certain size, based on their budget and population, to have an ethics law that is equivalent to the state law. There is a state ethics commission that adopts model ordinances for implementation in the municipalities. The 2021 legislative session resulted in some changes to the state ethics law, and the State Ethics Commission has now updated its model ordinance for municipalities to include those edits to the state law. So we've prepared an ordinance for introduction tonight to track the changes that have been made to the state's model ordinance. And there's nothing earth-shaking here. I'll go through the changes quickly. One, that no official or employee would retaliate against someone who's made a complaint under the ethics law. And when someone fills out their annual financial disclosure statement and lists interests in businesses, you must also list any trade names that those businesses use. You cannot receive gifts from entities that are engaged in the representation of governments. You have to disclose now interest in quasi-governmental entities, and you have to disclose interests held by businesses in which you hold an interest. So for example, if you have a 10% interest in a business that owns interests in other businesses, you have to disclose that second step. So these are just some issues that the State Ethics Commission, or the General Assembly rather, has noted should be added to the state law to address specific issues that have come up. Under town charter, as you know, when we adopt a law, first we introduce an ordinance, which we would do tonight, and then have a public hearing at the next council meeting on those proposed changes. I don't know if Evelyn's on yet, but the Town Ethics Commission reviewed the draft ordinance that I prepared and unanimously agreed that it should be presented to the town council for introduction tonight.
Do we have to proceed with this through I'm sorry, please go ahead, Joy, your hand is up.
Yes, Ron, while we have you, I would just like to ask what precipitated these changes. I mean, as you mentioned, they're not earth-shattering, but were there any events that occurred in particular municipalities that prompted these changes, or are these just kind of standard updates to ethics law?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I had the same question. I wondered whether there was some juicy stories that I could share. So I checked the legislative history, and there's no such stories noted in the the legislative history that I looked at. So I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I'm sure there was, one or two instances that gave the legislature the idea, because generally speaking, the law is scar tissue, it's reactive. For example, the requirement to now report interest in quasi-governmental entities. I just imagine that someone complained that their officials weren't disclosing those types of interests because they didn't fit within the definition of interest. And so the legislature recognized we need to expand the definition of entities for which you have to report. But yeah, I don't know of any specific instances. I could probably track that down if you really want to know.
No need.
And then also we've edited the form for our financial disclosure statement to track these ordinance changes. And the Town Ethics Commission has reviewed the changes to the form as well and found those appropriate.
Barney, Evelyn said that her son's not feeling well and she forgot about the meeting. So we had to proceed without her.
Okay. Any other questions? We have to have a motion then to have this introduced?
Yes.
That's correct.
Is there a motion to introduce this as for consideration of public hearing and vote next month?
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
Oh, okay. Rich gets the motion. Irene gets the second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Joy, I can't see you. Are you yay or are you yay?
Yay, yes.
Yay, okay, unanimous consent. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ron, for doing that. That's,
Sure.
I know that stuff is, it's good governance hygiene. We got to do it right. So happy to do it. Okay. Discussion item on 5G. And just to set the table on this, I'll be turning it over to Irene and you can handle this as you wish, if you wish to make some comments.
Okay.
But I just generally, what we're doing tonight is just being brought up to speed to some extent on the issue. What we do anticipate is that next month, there will be a proposed revisions to our ordinance, which we will be receiving in advance and being asked to have introduced, so we could have a public hearing at the November meeting.
So thank you, Mayor. The Public Services Committee, notably a 5G working group that consists, led by Beth Barnett and Michael Copeland and Ken Rubin, have been working on this issue for quite a while. It actually preceded my liaison with this particular committee. And what we have ahead of us is a few things that are going on where 5G cell infrastructure is a hot topic, not only throughout the county, but throughout the country in an attempt to upgrade the existing infrastructure and get us more connected, especially since, more people are working from home, the advent of potentially more Internet of Things and automated machinery, cars, things like that. So it all hinges, if you will, on having the appropriate infrastructure in place, and this is where 5G comes in. So the reason that it's a little bit more timely now is a few years ago, the county council passed a ZTA that allowed for 5G infrastructure to be installed throughout the county. And the setback for such infrastructure within residential areas was 60 feet. And in areas like ours, more established neighborhoods throughout the county, even in the town, there's you can count on one hand all the different homes that might be eligible with respect to the installation of equipment that's still 60 feet away from a home. The current county council is looking at a ZTA to decrease that setback from 60 feet to 30 feet, and that's presently in front of the council. They had a public hearing last week about it. What what the 5G working group was trying to figure out is, look, there's a lot of things happening at once with respect to the application process that a particular carrier, the Verizons, the T-Mobiles, that would put in their application to install their equipment in wherever throughout the county. And with that kind of decision process and how the town would be notified when a carrier would put forth an application is something that we have a lot of understanding, but there's still a lot more questions. So there's been a parallel effort in place to figure out what it is that as a town we are able to do. We have an ordinance in place, we have a right-of-way agreement, but in light of the 5G proliferation, what can we do to strengthen our rights, if you will? So under Ron's good leadership, there was an identification of a lawyer that specializes in FCC and, just looking at it at a federal level, what is it that municipalities can do? And one of the things that you're going to see today is the specific suggestions, recommendations to our current ordinance and right-of-way agreement that might be needed what is recommended so that we can strengthen our ordinance. In parallel, the 5G working group is also taking a look at additional scenarios. I call them kind of nightmare scenarios for how 5G equipment could be placed in the town, but yet there's other things in place like how would our tree ordinance be affected? How it is if the particular pole cannot support the weight of all of this equipment, things like that, and how our ordinance might further be strengthened. There's a little bit of a time crunch associated with this because the current ZTA that is in front of the county council is to be voted on October 25th. And ZTAs take effect 20 days after they are voted on and passed. Assuming there's passage, that means by the middle of November, there might be a lot more applications coming into the town to install 5G equipment in the town. So we're a little bit behind. I don't want to say behind the ball, but it's coming up very, very quickly. So the attempt today is to give, and this is where Ron will come in, to give an explanation of what our ordinance says today, what particular recommendations have come forth from our FCC lawyer, and then what are some things that the 5G working group is thinking about. Come next month, what we hope to do is provide more clarity on what the 5G working group would also like to recommend, so that in totality, we can think about during the October Town Council session, what we would like to potentially introduce and then have a public hearing about in November, so that we could still make the timeline for if the county council passes the ZTA that decreases the setback from 60 to 30. I probably said too much. I hopefully didn't bore all of you, but
two questions.
Two questions. Okay.
First of all, I want to make sure I understand. I thought the ZTA that was passed a couple of years ago did reduce the setback requirements from 60 to 30 feet for replacement poles or for new poles. What they didn't touch was the 60-foot setback for using an existing pole. And so it's this new ZTA, which is going to basically harmonize the reduction to 30 feet for existing as well as for, so in other words, the ZTA that was passed already reduced it from 60 to 30 for new poles and replacement poles. Anyway, this is not simply, but it's the change is that it would say for someone who puts an antenna on an existing pole, that also is 30 feet instead of 60 feet.
That is correct, except that what was also allowed in the previous CTA was this batching process. So when you're thinking about in conjunction where we didn't have many homes that were actually eligible, before and with the 60-foot setback, with the batching process, and then you also have the setback decreasing to 30, Now we have a whole bigger set of, how much public input could residents have, how much, so there's a lot of
Right.
unintended consequences that are coming with this particular ZTA that, yes, that it was passed before, but it didn't affect us as much as this particular one. Correct. And Beth, let me know if that's misrepresenting anything, or Ron.
So the other one is, I just want to make sure we get our process straight. We function best if we actually receive proposed language in front of us to be introduced, like the
Yeah.
ethics tonight.
Mhm.
If instead what we see next month is something which is still loose, in other words, some ideas, it's very hard. We aren't going to wordsmith it on the fly. And so I'd be worried then that we would not be able to introduce it. Now, I don't know whether one can introduce something between council meetings, but offhand, I would encourage everyone working on this to try to get to specific proposed language
In the
that can be
ordinance.
brought to the council next month. I think that will make it more efficient.
Agreed.
Can I make another
Sure,
point about
please.
that? One of our concerns has been all along this whole looking at 5G processes that we do it before the county does something that would essentially override what we
Our
would
zoning.
want to do.
Mm.
So my suggestion would be very similar, is that I would like us tonight to say, go ahead and produce an ordinance that fits this suggested framework that you've already got here, include those things so we can have that. And then those additional things you're thinking about, let them be deferred, because I'm concerned about going too far past that time where they actually
Pass it.
pass it.
Yeah.
And so, and there's a lot of those unintended consequence things, which we need to think through, and it's going to take the committee time. It's not and so my suggestion would be, write the
Yeah,
ordinance.
tonight to discuss that
Discuss
there's
this.
like a, generally
right.
giving the marching orders
Yeah.
that this is an agreement. Let's
All
put
right,
the
let's
wording
it the
in.
ordinance in.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Got it.
Can
Okay.
I ask Ron, for us, if we change or enact a new ordinance, how long does it take before it goes into effect?
30 days. So if you adopt next month, it'll be effective in November, unless you adopt it as an emergency. But
We're
Uh,
adopting it in November.
Yeah, we would be adopting it in November, the way this is working, because
oh, I'm sorry, yes,
October.
yeah, introduce in October, adopt in November, effective in December, unless it's adopted as an emergency. But
Okay, so
we can
if,
certainly have, oh, sorry.
yeah, so I'm just trying to, making sure that we can make the timing. So we on or around, I don't know what day that is, October 10th or 12th or something is our next meeting. So we would introduce something, but then we wouldn't approve it until November 10th or 12th or whatever that day is. But in the meantime, the county ZTA, they will have a vote on that ZTA on October 25. And
That's
then
right.
it goes into effect when, assuming they approve it?
20 days after.
20 days. Okay, so then that does mean, though, that we would have a gap in terms of coverage?
Well,
I'd
yes
say
and
something.
no. We do have an ordinance on the books now in the town that does require a permit for small cell deployment, does require a right-of-way access agreement, requires plans and specifications to be submitted, requires, certain design standards, like equipment must be 15 feet up the pole in the air so that there's no interference with the right-of-way. Generally requires things to be designed so that they minimize visual impact. Now, we adopted that a few years ago, and as Irene said, the PSC went through a rather comprehensive national review looking at standards adopted by other jurisdictions to see if we could strengthen ours. And the PSC came up with about 10 ways to do that. And then, as Irene noted, we had an FCC specialist, Tim Lay of Best and Krieger, take a look at it. And he gave us some thoughts, and he gave us some excellent edits for our right-of-way use agreement. So it's a long way of saying, I mean, we do have something in place now. So we're not unable to impose any requirements.
Irene, do you want? Beth, do you want?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
May I say something relevant to the concern about the timeline? So the 30-foot setback is going to be in the town right of way. So there has to be a permit pulled. So you don't really need to worry about the timing of the county's action, because even if, as Irene said, right after the 30-foot went into effect, which applies to an existing pole, they wanted to do something, the first thing they would have to do is to get a town permit, because that's what the ordinance covers. So you don't need to, and we're already in a position, we have a town, they would already have to apply to us. That's the point.
Okay,
So
thank
you
you.
don't
But-
need to worry about the timing.
Well, Beth, except our permit has to be according to those standards.
Right.
And the standards, that's what the problem is. So we would have to issue it if they changed the ZTA and our ordinance didn't cover it. So I'm still of the opinion that we need to get the ordinance done.
I agree. Even I agree with what you're saying, that they would still need to pull a permit. But if our design standards that are not in place in terms of what we want them to be, and the carrier is going to say, we're going to go with what you already got, it's these nightmare scenarios that we're trying to prevent. So it is an accelerated thing. I didn't know it was 20 days for ZTA. So that I just didn't know. I thought it was 90. So we'll have our ducks in a
Anyway, we.
That's fine.
That is, we still want to have an
Yes.
introduce an ordinance next month.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So what was passed or distributed was and Ron can certainly go through this, is a couple of charts to try and hopefully easily distinguish what the current town ordinance covers. And then the reason that there's a couple of red items in red color is because the suggested, thus far, this is not finalized yet, but the suggested kind of updates that the 5G working group have at least communicated initially attribute to those two areas that are currently in our ordinance. Whereas the third column is what the edits by Tim and Ron have been. So these are high level. The actual edits that Ron and Tim have discussed are already redlined in the ordinance and right-of-way agreement today, like
And
that.
So for example, just to make sure I understand what you're saying, Irene, the facilities must be located, designed to minimize visual impact. That's in our ordinance now? It's in red on the sheet.
That's in our ordinance now.
Why is it highlighted in red?
Because the second column of what the 5G working group
Mhm.
is focused on those two areas about
Sort of blowing them up in a sense.
blowing them up
Okay.
more to be more granular.
Thank you. Okay, now I
Yeah.
understand. Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay,
it
good.
wasn't
No.
that clear.
Fine.
And then because we don't want to go down a rabbit hole, it's, what we can actually do with our ordinance is ensure that our design standards are in place. What we can't do is in that final lower right column. Like we can't impose requirements that prevent the provision of service. So stuff like that.
Any questions or comments on the suggested PSC edits or the edits by the attorneys?
And again, those will be further refined by the time October comes around.
My suggestion would be that a lot of these are, they're self-explanatory when you read them, but I rely pretty well on that 5G working group to kind of look at the details. And I think they've done a good job. So my suggestion would be we we essentially say, okay, go with the suggested PSC edits modified by the attorney's edits.
Comments?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would, do I move that?
Well, I want to see if there are any other questions or comments from Troy or Joel? No? Okay.
I guess the only question I have in the back of my mind is the science about 5 feet.
Yeah.
Risks, or are there?
We can't
Yeah.
debate that.
If
We can
it,
debate it. We can't do anything about it.
can't do anything, yeah.
Right.
Well, there, if it helps add some context to the public hearing for the ZTA was last Tuesday. And a majority of the people who testified were talking about the science, we're talking, you know, to what I cannot tell sitting here is whether any of that convinced the county council of anything. So.
One question I have is the thought of reducing the number on a tower from 5 to 3. Well, what's the thinking there?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
What is it, 27 cubic feet of equipment? So you could, each carrier, if they decided to put up a facility, is limited by a certain perimeter. But you think about 5 of those on a tower, and it's gonna be
Pretty
pretty
intense.
intrusive.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So I think 3 is probably a reasonable.
However, it then instead of one pole, then it's maybe the pole next door.
That's right.
So it just lengthens. So I don't know.
You're spreading out the unsightliness in a
Right,
sense.
right.
You're spreading out the
Not
unsightly.
having it look like a
Right.
whole bunch of beehives on one.
However, if you do make sure that everything is on one, it'll kind of dictate a replacement pole that
Yes.
is needed, especially if there's other equipment like a transformer on that same pole. And you could just make it like one massive situation there, which may not be a terrible thing.
But
As long
the
as
other
it's
thing
further
we
away.
were- what they put on an existing pole is going to be determined by the owner of the pole, which is Pepco.
Pepco, yeah.
So Pepco is not going to allow these companies to come in and put equipment on their pole, which is going to make their pole fail.
Right.
Okay, so
They'll force them to put up a new pole.
they'll force them.
Who owns the new pole?
It's,
It would be whoever the carrier was, if it's their
And
pole.
then,
And
and then the other carriers will have to then approach that carrier
Yeah,
and say, can we
right, that's-
piggyback on your pole?
and there's no guarantee that if the new pole is put up next to the older pole, that Pepco is actually going to remove that other pole. So we'll be looking at situations like this throughout the town.
So this is, a lot of this stuff is, the engineering is going to take care of a lot of it. Because if you want to, first of all, there's differences in the kind of equipment they're going to put on based on the frequency in which they want to go to. And the lower 5G frequencies don't require as much technology as the higher frequency does, in the sense of distance. The lower 5G, you don't need a pole every 30 feet. You may need it every 100 feet. But to go higher frequencies, you got to have closer, the transmission has to be closer.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
It's the same, okay. So in effect, again, I get back to, that they've done a good job of looking at the bigger picture here. And we ought to get this done as soon as we can, and then let them think about.
And we
things
can
that
make
may have
subsequent
unintended
changes if we need to make
consequences.
subsequent changes. It's not like
We'll
it's the
make
only
subsequent
only
changes.
place.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
And then just calling attention to Ron's good chart here of the comparison between what the county is regulating and what we also at the town level do. I think that was a very good explanation there. So
Good. All right. I
That's
think-
where we're
I
at.
think you have your
Beth, do you have any other? Okay,
blessing to come back with language next time for us to introduce.
okay.
That'd be great. Good. Thank you very much for all that work, Beth, and your.
Thank you,
team.
Beth.
Ron, thank you.
All right.
Okay, on to the last item. Joel and I were sent a proposed mayor's compact to combat hate and extremism. And Joel, it's your interest in having the town endorse this. So do you want to say something about it before we discuss it?
Thanks, Mayor Rush. Yeah, just real briefly, this statement, it's a compact, but it's really a statement with 10 principles behind it, was put together in the lead up to last week's summit, the United We Stand Summit, which was held at the White House, anti-hate summit, basically. And the goal was to get towns and mayors to sign on to it prior to the summit, but it's an ongoing signature opportunity. So I'm happy that we're talking about it tonight. Basically, as we all know, with increasing hate around the country, and when there are attacks, it's towns and cities that are the ones at the front lines. They're the first responders. We're the ones that have to deal with immediate impacts on families, on the communities, engage with first responders if necessary, police, whatnot. We've had some incidents here in the town that have fortunately not been violent, but have been upsetting to some over the past several years, with neo-Nazi flyers spread around, KKK paraphernalia left in front of homes and at street corners, and a little bit of data recently in Montgomery County. Bias incidents are were up 22% from 2020 to 2021. It's probably on that trajectory still. In 2020, the FBI showed a nearly 300% increase in crimes committed against people in Maryland based on their race, ethnicity, or ancestry from 2019 to 2020. So it's a hot environment out there, obviously, but I don't want to make any assumptions or take anything for granted in the communication of it. So the bottom line is this: is U.S. Conference of Mayors, organized with the Anti-Defamation League, this statement, and has asked mayors to sign on. It's a sort of a statement of principles about what mayors and municipalities, cities can do to try to combat, counter, and discourage and ultimately defeat incidents of hate. So I thought it was a nice statement, something that if we put our name to it through the mayor, that would be adding us to a list of 150 or so cities around the country. It's a dynamic list, so it's ongoing. I don't believe it requires any commitments beyond signing on, although I assume it would include future invitations to sign on, future actions, and maybe other kinds of requests. But I think it aligns with the values here at the town that we've been advancing. So I wanted to seek council support for our signing on to it. But I know that there are also questions about some of the language. So happy to discuss it and see what we can do with it.
All right, let me open it for comment. Anyone like to comment on it?
So Joel, would you envision some programming around this for residents that, I don't know, if they don't feel empowered necessarily, like what else can I do kind of a thing? Would there be some additional awareness of what's going on around the country or around the state, or specific just educational opportunities to be more proactive about this?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've gone in fits and starts with the town. We had a racial justice a special committee that had some good initiatives, some public education that's on pause right now. I've been in touch with the ADL regional director. She has offered to come and speak or do events here if need be. So there's a lot of stuff that could potentially be done, nothing concrete, but I do think it gives us a platform to, first of all, I think in the recent experience with the KKK flyers, we saw a positive response across the town as a result of our statement, including our outreach to local law enforcement, county council members and others, and just showing residents that there was a local governing entity that was there and available. And so this kind of builds on that public morality, moral support, I meant to say, that kind of like suasion But I do think it's a good idea to have events and see if we can do discussions from time to time. We had a well-attended one back in 5 years now, in 2017. So maybe a little more ad hoc, but I do think it gives us a platform to explore that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly through the Community Relations Committee, if you were able to identify some speakers. I mean, I'm personally of someone I don't want necessarily, this is personal, I wouldn't want to sign on to something unless we're backing up what we're saying with action. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than just signing.
Which I guess one of the other questions, does this carry with the mayor or does it carry with the town? So if the mayor signs this, is the next mayor not?
Well, the benefit of having a support of the council and the mayor did want to have support of the council for signing on to this because it's sort of a reflection of the town as well. It's not just the individual. So I think it does carry with the town. Unless you want to try otherwise, but that would mean the mayor acting independently, but he felt it was important to have the council, which I think is the right approach.
When I read through it, it's hard to not support a document like this. But like all these documents, it's rather broad brush. And it kind of loops, our state and our town into sounding, it somewhat sounds like we're some of the perpetrators of some of these things. So is it acceptable to modify the language before he signs it and then
I don't think so, but I mean, what are the points that when acts of violence occur, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Within states.
Yeah.
I think Maryland has done a pretty good job of trying to eradicate that kind of hate from the state. And certainly the town does. I mean, we're trying to do all of those things. So it's just certain phrases in it that just kind of said, wait a minute, we're not doing that. So why would we? That was my gut.
Well, the data is the opposite. Maryland might be doing a good job at trying to combat it, but the data is that it's on the rise. And I think that's sort of the reason for why this and other efforts nationally are underway, is because there's a clear trend and trajectory of increasing hate speech and hate crimes. And so what this does is it actually gives the signal to local leaders and law enforcement and communities that that's not acceptable, to your point. And I think that's sort of but if there's language in here that, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the language is that makes you feel uncomfortable, because we could go back to the conference of mayors and ask them.
No, I don't.
I mean, this is in my document, right? So like, I didn't draft this. So this is I should have been clear on that at the front end. So this is the conference of mayors and the ADL is supporting them, but the conference of mayors essentially wrote this document and is circulating it. So it's not, if I were drafting it, it'd probably look different, in and of itself. I probably have different priorities or different ways of phrasing it, but it's a sign-on opportunity.
Joy, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I do. And I guess, I'm the first person, me and my family, who could be directly harmed by a lot of these hate crimes. And there's a lot of our residents are in the same boat. But there's just a lot of statements that I find, just as Rich said, that are really broad brush that don't necessarily pertain to us. And I would not want us as a town to be calling for example, the prioritization of anti-bias and anti-hate programs in schools without knowing what the content of those are. likewise, in terms of, celebrating diversity, fostering inclusivity, challenging bias, I just find it somewhat limiting. Whereas, if I think back to the KKK incident, what we really want to promote and signal is that, this is a place where we're just not standing for intimidation, threats, anything that's sort of related to, anything negative that's directed at people who represent, people of really any racial background, religious background, or whatever. Because I guess what may be, this is a majority white town, but you could go over to PG County and you'd have the flip side. And so I guess I find this a little bit too specific in things that don't really pertain to us, and that don't really get at what ultimately as a town I think we would want to promote, and that we want everyone to feel comfortable here. We want everyone to be protected, and that we're just not going to stand for threats or intimidation against anyone. And I don't think this statement gets at that.
Thank you, Joy. I guess my comments are in line with what Joy and I think that's what you were saying. I think if you're asking for some specifics, Joel, I guess what first got my attention was the opening line of the fourth paragraph. We are seeing efforts, particularly in our states, to weaken existing civil rights policies and reduce their enforcement, suppress voting, and restrict what can be taught in our schools or housed in our libraries. Now, I take your point from the data that there could be a growing number of hate crimes in Maryland. That may be a true statement, I guess it is. But as a citizen of the state, I don't see the efforts to weaken civil rights policies or reduce their enforcement, suppress voting. I think Maryland, it's led to some policies that have stretched out the time it takes to count the absentee ballots, as we found out in this primary. But it just seems to me that I'm sorry.
Depends on who wins the governorship.
Well, okay, but the point is that whenever I read a sentence like that, I ask myself the question: if we signed on to this, and by the way, if it were the mayor, I would only be acting on behalf of the council. That has to be clear. I would not do anything just because it's a mayor's document. I don't see the governance of our town that way. In other words, we don't have a strong mayor system where a mayor is independently elected and can make his or her own decisions. So we're always a collective on something like this. I'm just very concerned about someone literally saying, well, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Particularly in Maryland, a weakening of civil rights policies, would please tell me what you're talking about? And I wouldn't have a clue.
This is a national sign-on. I need to be clear. This is a national sign-on letter. This is not specific to the town of Chevy Chase. This is
well, I know it's not specific.
It's national,
right?
So it's a national, and to say that civil rights policies are not being attacked nationally and the voting is not being attacked nationally is inaccurate.
I hear you. I hear your comment, but if that were truly a national letter, then presumably that paragraph could have said, "We see across the nation."
Oh, I mean, that's
vote, right?
happy to glad.
But it doesn't say that. It says particularly these states. So it's almost
no,
like,
it doesn't say these states. Our states. That's happy to glad.
Well, but if we're signing it, we're also saying it's true for Maryland. I just feel very uncomfortable.
It's everywhere but Maryland.
That's the reading of it.
I think here's where I understand. Sign-on letters are always about the quibbling, and there's a lot to quibble about in the sign-on letter. And if you don't want to sign a sign-on letter, don't sign a sign-on letter. But the point of it is that there is a A legitimate threat has happened here in this town. And it is happening in Montgomery County. And there are Nazi slogans in our public schools right up the street. And there are kids in our schools who have guns and they are in sheltering in place. So I know it might not be comfortable for people to hear that, but that is happening right here, right now. And so these statements of national resolve, sponsored by the Conference of Mayors, the ADL, another national organization, these are efforts to try to coalesce and mobilize and educate. So I get it, like there are lines in there that I wouldn't like, but I've heard this before, Barney. I heard it on the climate sign-on letter a few years ago about, well, we don't support, we're different. We're in the town. We're not going to sign on to a climate national compact of mayors signing to protect us from the climate change. And we're unique. We're not unique. We're actually very much average and normal. The town of Chevy Chase. We're part of Montgomery County, which has one of the most diverse populations in the country and extreme inequities. So I feel like for us, if we put our signature on this, we're demonstrating that we actually are aware of what's happening around us.
Yeah, I certainly have, when I read through the commitment part of it,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do that. We would, pledge to do this. Those didn't bother me at all. I mean, those were all good commitments. I know it's kind of pushing the noodle for you to go back to Conference of Mayors and ADL to get a few phrases changed. So I certainly support the commitment part of this.
I mean, it's not like it's extremely mainstream.
Yeah.
In the most mainstream
how can
of
you-
ways.
Yeah, you can't object.
It was
to
presented
most-
at the White House last week for a national conference about how the cities can combat and deal with rising hate and extremism.
Just for everyone's edification, the mayor of College Park and the mayor of Salisbury, Maryland have also signed on. Just for your
Anybody
knowledge.
else in Montgomery County?
Not in Maryland. That's been it for, but I don't know how.
There's only 2 cities in Maryland.
I don't know how up to date this is. This is the thing I could find for, but it's all over a lot of places all over the country. So. Sorry, September 15th.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
it's
4
pretty
days ago, as of 4 days ago.
good.
Well-
Do we have any idea what our own police department in Montgomery County is doing in respect to workshops to identify and respond to hate?
It's very haphazard.
Well, I actually took a look to see and the budget for 2 years ago was increased significantly to train the officers and, making sure they dealt with citizens correctly and all that. So there was a big chunk of money allocated for that purpose. So I don't know. I don't know what other things the county's doing in terms of hate and I do know that a lot of, there's a lot of rhetoric around it. I don't know what actual programs they've got to make changes, but.
Well, I can put it to a council
Yeah,
vote, but I'm not going to sign it without
short.
having support from the council.
Fair setting.
And
Yeah.
If we take a vote, my personal view is I'm still uncomfortable. I care about every word and I understand these are sign-on letters and I understand what you call quibbles, but I think calling out a statement about our state that I have no ability to verify troubles me a great deal. And I really believe that if the authors of this had thought about that, they could have come up with different wording, but they didn't. And it's like something that came from Texas, and they're asking for mayors from Texas and Florida and other states to say, yeah, that's us. I'm signing on, but
I don't understand how it's not verified. I mean, there's FBI data, there's Montgomery County Police data that I cited.
I'm not, the point isn't the degree of that there are hate crimes, Joel. As I said, it's the specific language that is calling out acts of basically read it again. We are seeing efforts, particularly in our states, so that has to include Maryland, as though
Yes.
Maryland is worse than others because we're signaling our states, particularly in our states, to weaken existing civil rights policies and reduce their enforcement, suppress voting, and restrict what can be taught in our schools. And I just don't know that. That doesn't mean there's an increase in hate crimes, but someone has to tell us what is actually going on in our state that makes that statement true.
Well, I'm disappointed. I don't think this is that controversial. I certainly don't think it's committing us to anything because we're recognizing the national level it's occurring in our states. Doesn't mean in the state of Maryland, all of this is pertinent. It cites certain cities where there were violent crimes committed, and so I guess I'll withdraw and just say it's disappointing. And I think, to be honest, I think it's actually embarrassing.
You can explain why?
No, it doesn't make any sense to me. Anyone who's ever engaged in any public sign-on letter can always find a line or two that they may disagree with. It's not even in the resolved clause. It's in a preamble, and it doesn't even say my state. It says our states as a national. That's really picking at straws.
I don't see it that way.
I know, but that's disappointing, and I find it reprehensible. So I'm going to withdraw it because I find this to be deeply discouraging that after the experiences we're having in this town and nearby and around, people would rather worry about happy to glad than actually make a statement affirming that we're concerned about this.
If you want to,
So I'm going to exit.
I wanted to make a suggestion. Can I?
Bye bye. Good night, Joel.
Can somebody repeat the question, please?
So our resident Deborah Volmo, I was actually going to suggest a similar thing. So the idea would be, is there a pot, and please, Deborah, let me know if I misconstrued. The idea would be, would the town be able to potentially use the ADL statement as a potential starting point template, but devise our own statement that at a town council we feel very comfortable with, and whether it be posting on the website or, you know, something announcing it to our residents that we are absolutely aligned with the general principles of the mayoral statement, but this is something that we wanted to make sure it was specific to the town. Is that, Deborah, is that what you were?
All states that we would say recognizing
some states. Yeah, exactly.
And just, you know, modify that part.
Yep.
That would satisfy
We can't hear the conversation.
Yeah, so sorry, I'll try and paraphrase. So that particular statement that that a few of us had problems with saying that, you know, there are issues in our state, including Maryland, that some states are having issues, and we're recognizing that. So it's essentially taking the initial statement and then modifying it to language that would still work. But again, it's hard to make that suggestion at this point.
I'm sorry, did you want to say? Okay. I think sorry, Beth, but this is deliberation by the council. To me, there are two separate issues in this. One is wanting to be very clear about our being concerned about the rise of hate crime and wanting to make sure that we are opposed to it. And I think on that, maybe what could be done is actually work something within Montgomery County, if that's what we want to do, and try to actually get broad sign on from other municipalities in Montgomery County. And we have means to do that. And also check to see what the county council itself has passed. Maybe there's a resolution that the county council has undertaken that we would want to have the different municipalities in the county sign on. So I think that's something that could well make me very comfortable. And I also think that it's useful to separate hate crime from some of the other things listed because they're distinct. What has most upset us has been the pamphlets in our town of KKK and others, and we want to make a stronger statement in opposition to that and want to know that law enforcement is paying attention to that. But that is quite separate from an issue of voter suppression or, what's allowed in our schools. So I think if we are both more targeted, but also looking for something which really has common ground with the other municipalities in Maryland or in Montgomery County to start with, that would be a good place for us to start. Yeah, right. But so I can work that.
I don't know who wants to make that suggestion, but it's on the record as something that could be done.
Yeah, okay. Joy, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I really like your suggestion, Barney, kind of looking at what has been done currently, what kind of statements that the county has made. And I think we should, but at the end of the day, I think you're right. We should be mindful of kind of those couple of areas. One is hate crimes that, this is not the place to perpetrate them. One, and then two, that again, just like all of the other ordinances that we have enacted, that we've modified over time, that, we stand for our residents and we want to make sure that all of our residents feel comfortable and safe here.
Right. That's well put. Okay. Beth, I just want to make sure we finish our deliberations. Did you have something you wanted to add? I'll let you certainly speak.
It's just that I agree with your presentation, and I also agree with what Rich said. This is an act that really just the impact of the statement that we really about this side of the state. So it's really calling to attention the importance of this issue. But we're really signing a letter isn't going to happen.
Right.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, we can't hear any.
No, Beth, why don't you go up to the podium, Beth?
I was just saying.
Still can't hear.
I think it needs to be green.
Oh, I was piggybacking on what Rich said. Action, what action are we going to take if we're bringing, this is coming to our attention as something important for us to think about and act on. Signing a letter, particularly a letter that you're just saying, well, you may not agree with all the sentiments, but it's a group call. It's not really very impactful, in my opinion. But doing something about it, because it is an important issue, would be more impactful.
Thank you. Okay, any other business? We're done? Okay, I'll be turning around the binding elements and getting around for thought and thinking, trying to scope out the side letter you're suggesting and see what we can do over the next couple of days. Adjourned.
Good night, everyone.